Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Liam Harper, and I was 38 years old when this happened in November 2022. I've spent the past year out here in the deep woods of Kentucky, specifically in a pocket of the Daniel Boone National Forest near the Rockcastle Narrows and Sinking Creek. I built myself a small cabin far from the roads and far from the eyes of the people I left behind. It was supposed to be my fresh start, an escape from the life that had collapsed around me. I wanted quiet, separation from all those reminders that I'd failed to hold on to anything that mattered. Before I get into what happened, I should say that I wasn't a soldier or anything like that. I don't have specialized combat training. I was just a civil engineer who found the constant 9-to-5 drudgery and the uneasy hush of a broken marriage too heavy to carry. I craved some kind of real challenge. Something to keep me busy and push my body without having to talk to anyone unless I chose to. So, I sold my car, left behind the half-empty house my wife and I once shared, and started gathering everything I'd need for off-grid living. Over months, I compiled tools, seeds, building materials. I scouted remote areas. I found a secluded corner near the Rockcastle River and decided to settle there. Maybe if I'm being honest with myself, this was a desperate attempt to see if isolation would bring me peace. But everything changed one dark, sodden November night. It was the night I first met Kane, the lost hiker who wasn't really a hiker at all. I live alone with my German shepherd, Bear. He's a 6-year-old dog I rescued from a shelter a couple of years back. Bear has been my only constant friend since my marriage ended. A quiet presence that never judged me. He and I built a comfortable routine out here. Gather firewood, tend my small vegetable patch, occasionally fish or hunt for fresh meat, and spend nights in the glow of the wood stove. The location is remote enough that I can go for weeks without seeing a human face. Time moves differently in the forest. You get used to the hush of the trees, the drip of morning dew, the rolling green hills and the crooked branches overhead. Most nights, I sleep deeply to the lullaby of crickets and the distant hoot of owls. But in mid-November 2022, the routine began to crack. First, my phone battery started to die much faster than normal, even though I run it off solar chargers. I'd see it go from 70% to 0 in minutes, as if something were draining it. Then my compass, which I use for exploring new sections of forest, started spinning like it was magnetized from every direction at once. One day, I pulled out my big physical map, something I trust more than phone-based apps out here, and discovered the trail markings looked shifted. Forks in the path had relocated. The topography itself seemed different. That alone was unsettling, but I chalked it up to mistakes in the map, or maybe some old magnet deposits in the region. Then, strange things happened around my cabin. My fire pit, which I keep carefully tended, started acting up. The flames would gutter and burn green for a few seconds, only to revert to a normal color as soon as I'd get close to investigate. Another afternoon, Bear and I were out gathering kindling, and I found a newly dead deer about a mile from my cabin. Its eyes were scorched black, though there wasn't a mark on its body. Just the eyes. "Come on, boy," I said, tugging Bear's collar gently. "Let's head back." I felt uneasy staring at that sight. A perfect deer corpse except for the hollowed-out sockets. Bear whined, sniffed the air, and let out a deep growl unlike anything I'd heard from him before. It made my hair stand on end. That same night, I had my first dream. In it, I saw my wife, ex-wife, hovering on the edge of the bed. She was dripping wet, lips parted in a silent moan. When I woke, it was 4 in the morning. and the cabin was cold as a crypt despite the fire in the stove. I checked the stove door. The wood was there, the embers glowed, but no heat reached my body. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe the cold was in my mind. Grief does weird things. Guilt does too. I threw extra logs in, sat on my bunk, and waited until dawn. But dawn did something else. The sun rose 2 hours earlier than normal. I remember looking at my watch, 5:15 a.m., and there it was, a slice of gray light seeping through the window cracks. I told myself it was just a weird phenomenon, some atmospheric quirk, a faulty watch. I went through the day feeling restless, uncertain. Bear didn't leave my side. He stuck close, as if sensing my anxiety. That evening, as I prepped dinner from a few old canned goods, beans mostly, clouds gathered overhead. A fierce storm was rolling in, the kind that hammers this region. Rain battered my rooftop, drumming in a steady, deafening downpour that shook the cabin walls. The wind howled, and branches scratched at the windows, sounding almost like nails trying to claw their way in. Bear paced back and forth, whining, scratching at the door. Then it happened, a hard knock. Once, twice, 3 times, rattling the wood. I froze, ladle in hand, thinking, who in the world could that be? I rarely got visitors and never in a thunderstorm. Before I answered, I grabbed my flashlight. Bear bristled at my side, hackles raised. He was silent, but I could feel his tension. I unbarred the door, braced it with my shoulder. Rain blasted in, and aimed the flashlight. There stood a man, water streaming down his face and clothes. He wore a soaked parka, backpack sagging with the weight of water, hair plastered to his skull. Despite the rain in his eyes, he smiled, revealing strangely white teeth. "Evening," he said in a level, almost too calm voice. "My name's Kane. Got turned around in all this weather. Mind if I come in for a moment?" Normally, I'd be cautious. Nobody just wanders out here. But the man was clearly drenched and looked like he'd freeze to death. It wasn't my nature to turn away someone who could be in real trouble. My only hesitation was Bear. He let out a vicious snarl, the loudest I'd ever heard from him, and tried to lunge forward. It shocked me. He'd never done that with a stranger. "Kane, is it?" I said. "All right, let me get the dog back." Sure, Kane said. His gaze locked onto Bear, and I could have sworn for a second his pupils reflected a strange gleam, like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. I pulled Bear away, then let Kane slip inside. In the flickering lantern light, he looked better than I'd expected. Healthy, well-muscled, not half-starved like most lost hikers. His parka was expensive, and his face was completely unshaven, giving him a rugged appearance. "Thanks for letting me in," he said, brushing water off. "I was out for a multi-day hike, but I lost my bearings in the storm. Not sure how far I am from the main trail." "You're quite a ways," I replied. "I'm Liam. Haven't seen a soul out here in months, but, well, you're welcome to wait out the storm." Bear continued to growl softly. I tugged his collar again, and Kane flashed that polite smile and shrugged off his backpack. We passed an uneasy hour with me spooning out some lukewarm beans, and Kane quietly sipping from a small flask of whiskey he offered to share. I declined the whiskey. I wasn't in the mood to dull my senses with a stranger in my cabin. The entire time, Bear wouldn't settle. He paced, stared at Kane, stared at me, and never once wagged his tail. Kane's voice was eerily calm. He told me he was from Lexington, just a bit of an adventurer who got too confident in reading the land. I can usually spot lies. Something about his story felt too practiced. The timing of it, the details he gave, they were neither too detailed nor too vague. Polished, almost. But I didn't challenge him directly. When the storm didn't let up, I set out a spare sleeping pad across from mine near the stove. I kept an eye on my rifle by the door, but it made me feel paranoid. I wasn't a fighter, and to be honest, I'd never fired that rifle at anything bigger than a deer. Still, something about Kane made my skin crawl. I noticed small details, how he didn't blink much, how his lips would twitch upward in a grin that never quite reached his eyes, how, whenever Bear looked at him, Kane's face adopted a cold intensity that vanished if I turned. Later, I tried to sleep through the thunder. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake because I felt someone standing over me. I'd glance around, just the faint, flickering glow of the dying fire. Kane lay on his back, eyes closed, breathing slow, or so it seemed. Sometime near dawn, I dreamt of my wife's voice. She whispered, "You talk in your sleep, Liam." I woke, heart pounding. The storm had eased, but the cabin was cloaked in gloom. The clock on my phone read 7:03 a.m., but there was hardly any light outside. Another glitch, another bizarre shift in time. I unlatched the door to check the skies. The clouds were thick, but not so thick that it should look like the middle of the night. When I stepped outside, an electric tang hung in the air. My body hair prickled from static. I turned back and froze. Looking in the window, I saw Kane standing over my bunk, not lying in his sleeping pad. His posture was stiff, predatory. He was leaning down as if sniffing the bedding. Bear barked from the door, startling me. Kane straightened and turned, meeting my gaze through the window with a grin that made me dizzy. I hurried back inside. "Morning," I said, trying not to show how rattled I was. He smiled politely. "Morning, Liam. I was just checking your wood stove, making sure your fire's still going. I'm grateful for the shelter." "Yeah, no problem." I glanced at Bear. The dog was near the corner, hackles raised. He looked ready to lunge if Kane took one step closer to me. I swallowed hard. "Let me, make coffee?" Kane nodded with that same eerie calm. "Sounds wonderful." I spent the next 2 hours trying to figure out how to get Kane on his way. The storm had reduced to a gentle patter, so he shouldn't need to stay any longer. But he never broached the subject of leaving. He just hovered, occasionally telling bland stories of his alleged hiking adventures. Something was off in his details. He'd mention a place in Kentucky, but sometimes slip in references that contradicted themselves. Eventually, I said, "So, do you need a guide back to the main route, or—" He looked at me. For a moment, I could have sworn his eyes darkened like burnt embers. Then he gave a small chuckle. "I suppose it's time I head on. Thank you for your hospitality. Although I might need some help if you can spare it." "What kind of help?" "A map. Mine got soaked, ruined." I didn't love the idea of giving him one of my backup maps. I only had 2, and these were vital to my navigation in these hills. But I couldn't see a polite way out of it. So I rummaged in a small chest near my bunk, withdrew my older map, and handed it over. Bear let out a low growl again. I gave him a firm hush. "Quiet, boy." Kane smiled. "You've got a good dog there." We exchanged a few brief words, and then I watched him step onto the sodden earth. The drizzle kissed his parka. He raised a hand in a casual wave. "I won't forget this, Liam. Farewell." I didn't respond, just shut the door. My gut churned with the sensation that something was deeply wrong. Bear sniffed at the door and growled again. I quickly locked it, then slumped against it, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It took a few hours for the tension in my body to unwind. I spent that day chopping wood, taking Bear on a loop around the property, and checking the perimeter for storm damage. I needed to confirm my solar panel was still intact because the phone battery had gone nuts the night before. The panel looked okay. The phone, however, was at 0%. Sometimes I'd try to power it on and get only a flicker of life. That night, I struggled to sleep. Rain hammered the roof again, though it was more subdued than before. I dozed for maybe an hour before I jerked awake to the sound of Bear barking furiously outside. I almost never leave him out after dark, so the fact that he was out there terrified me. I shot upright and realized the cabin door was wide open. The hair stood on the back of my neck. I never leave that door open. Bear's barking was frantic, coming from somewhere behind the cabin. I scrambled to grab a flashlight and my rifle. "Bear," I called out, voice trembling. "Bear, come!" No answer, except that piercing bark in the distance. I hurried outside, stepping in puddles that soaked my boots, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Then Bear's bark cut off abruptly, like someone had silenced him mid-breath. My pulse raced. I sprinted to the back of the cabin, scanning the underbrush. Trees seemed to loom larger, overshadowing the path. The wind hissed in the branches. Flashlight shaking in my hand, I called Bear's name again. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I whipped the flashlight in that direction. Nothing. Just a swirl of mist. Then I heard a snapping sound, like thick rope straining and cracking. Slowly, I advanced, rifle raised. When I reached the edge of the trees, my flashlight revealed a horrifying sight. Bear, strung up between two twisted trunks, pinned with lengths of rope made from soaked tree bark. He'd been gutted from sternum to belly. His blood shone in the beam, dripping onto the ground. His eyes were destroyed, charred black craters in his skull. Even as I stared, a final spasm racked his hind legs, and a wet gurgle escaped his open chest. I dropped to my knees, shock roaring in my ears. "No," I whispered. "No, Bear, no." My mind went blank with grief and terror. As I reached to touch his muzzle, the rope hissed and dissolved into ropey threads, letting Bear's lifeless body slump. I gagged at the smell of coppery blood and something else, something burning. Then, behind me, a voice spoke. "He ran off, Liam," it said quietly. "Such a shame." I spun, rifle aimed, flashlight glare revealing Kane leaning against a tree. His face was hidden in shadow, but I saw the glimmer of his eyes. My hands shook so badly I could hardly keep my weapon on him. What did you do?" I choked. My voice cracked with grief. Kane stepped into the beam. There was no sign of blood on him. His smile was calm. "I told you, he ran off. I found him like this." "You're lying." I squeezed the rifle's trigger. Nothing happened except a dull click. Panic coursed through me. I tried again, pulling the bolt. My ammo fell out in my hand, each cartridge corroded and crumbling into dust as if centuries old. "Yes," Kane said. "I'm afraid you won't find those bullets very effective." My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't leave Bear's body. Yet the logical part of me knew there was nothing I could do for him now. With a strangled sob, I turned and sprinted back toward the cabin, tears blurring my vision. The wind whipped at me and I stumbled in mud, nearly dropping the useless rifle. I made it to the cabin, slammed the door, and latched it. My heart hammered, disbelief flooding me. I'd just seen my dog mutilated and pinned to a tree, and there was no explanation that made sense, no rational reason for how my cartridges turned to dust. Thunder boomed again, a new wave of storm. If Kane wanted to break the door down, I suspected he could. But no more knocks came. I stayed awake until my eyes burned. No sign of him. At dawn, whatever dawn meant in that warped place, I ventured outside. Bear's body was gone. The ropes, the blood, everything. As though it had never been there. I was numb. Grief hammered me. The only friend who'd stayed with me through my turmoil was dead, and I couldn't even bury him. My senses told me to get out of these woods, but the idea of leaving permanently was a step I wasn't sure how to manage. My old life was an option I'd rejected. Yet staying was, well, no longer safe. In the daylight, I grabbed my backup supplies: water purifier, some freeze-dried meals, clothing, a small first aid kit. I tried to gather enough gear to survive on foot. If Kane was out there, I sure as hell didn't want to keep myself locked in the cabin as an easy target. And if the forest was twisting around me, maybe my only hope was to keep moving until I found a road or a ranger station. But when I stepped away from the cabin, a strange phenomenon took hold. An hour of walking west, following a route I knew well, brought me right back to the same clearing. No matter how many times I turned around, used the sun as a guide, if the sun was even real, I wound up in the same place. My compass still spun aimlessly. I'd tried using a pencil to mark cut trees or carve lines in bark, but the forest seemed to rearrange itself when I wasn't looking. Time also began to slip. The sun rose, set, and then rose again in the span of a single day, or maybe a single hour. My watch became meaningless. I'd try to rest, drift off for a short nap, and wake to find the cabin's shadows in the same position, as if no time had passed. Or I'd doze for what felt like minutes, only to find it was pitch black out and the temperature had dropped by 30 degrees. 2 nights after Bear's death, I noticed something else. From the corner of my eye, I kept seeing someone walk by the window. I thought it was Kane. But once, I forced myself to look directly. Instead of Kane, I saw someone else. Me. A younger version of me, maybe from 10 years ago, hair shorter, wearing the same expression of despair I remember from my final months with my wife. He'd drift out of sight, and when I'd rush outside, there'd be no sign of him. I started losing it. I nearly broke down the second night, rummaging through old photos on my phone. That was a fruitless effort because the phone's battery was shot. I tried plugging it into the solar panel, but it refused to charge. On top of that, my flashlight flickered erratically. My radio spat out whispers in the static. Sometimes I thought I heard my wife's voice. Sometimes a child's cry. Then Kane returned in earnest. I was dozing near the fireplace, an iron poker in hand, half expecting him to break down the door. Instead, I jolted awake to find him just there in the cabin, standing in the corner with a small, mysterious grin on his lips. He looked perfectly dry, despite the rain howling outside. I shot to my feet, brandishing the fire poker. "Get out," I yelled, adrenaline surging. "Get the hell out of here." He tilted his head. "This doesn't have to be difficult, Liam. I'm here to help." "Help?" I barked out a laugh. "You killed my dog. You trapped me here. Why are you doing this?" Kane's smile faltered. "You blame me, but truly, you brought this on yourself. Some doors, when opened, can't be closed again." "What doors? I don't know what you're talking about." Kane looked at the small, battered photo of my wife pinned to the wall. I'd guess it started there. That heartbreak, that despair. Darkness loves to slip through cracks in the soul. And your soul, Liam, it's full of cracks. He approached me. I swung the poker, the tip whistling through the air. He grabbed it with one hand, stopping it dead. I felt a jolt, as if he'd yanked the breath from my lungs. My arms trembled under his grip. Then, with a sharp yank, he wrenched the poker free and tossed it aside. In desperation, I dove for my useless rifle, only for him to press a hand to my shoulder, holding me pinned against the floor like I was a child. His touch was scalding, burning through my shirt, and my vision began to blur. He leaned in. "I can fix it, you know, take the pain away, rewrite the ending." He let go. My chest was on fire and I curled up, panting. By the time I looked again, he was gone. The door stood open to the night, letting in the chill wind. In the following hours, I decided to burn the cabin. Better to lose everything I'd built than to let that thing keep using it as a trap. I loaded a backpack with enough supplies to hopefully survive, if the forest ever let me out, and I doused the interior with lamp oil. Before lighting the match, I paused. This was my dream after all, a life away from everyone. But something malignant had turned it into a nightmare. I tossed the match. Flames bloomed, hungry and orange. They devoured the cabin. Smoke curled black and thick in the night sky, and in the flicker of that hellish glow, I thought I saw Kane's silhouette near the tree line, arms folded as though applauding. I ran. The forest was dark, lit only by the dancing glow of my burning home. Branches scraped my arms. My legs churned through muck and undergrowth. At some point, I twisted an ankle on a gnarled root. My vision blurred with tears, rage and grief at losing Bear, losing my last hope for normalcy. I no longer cared about direction. I only wanted to escape. I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes, morning light stabbed at me through the canopy. I was lying in a patch of wet leaves. My ankle throbbed, wrapped in what looked like a bandage of tattered cloth. I didn't remember doing that. Stranger still, I looked around and realized I was only about 50 yards from the still intact cabin. No charred beams, no smoke, nothing. The cabin was standing there, looking the same as always, except the front door was closed. My breath caught. I limped to the side window, pressing my face to the glass. Inside, everything was exactly where it had been. My bedding, my small table, even my battered photo of my wife pinned to the wall. No sign of any fire or damage. It was like last night never happened. That was the moment I felt reality tear. I couldn't comprehend how the cabin had restored itself, or if maybe the fire was just another hallucination, and I'd slept in the woods for some random reason. Something is wrong with time, I thought, or with my mind. Either way, I knew I had to keep moving. I wouldn't step foot in that cabin. I gathered my scattered pack, still damp from the dew, and started walking again, ignoring the throbbing in my ankle. The next few days, or hours, time blurred, were filled with repeated attempts to escape the forest. Sometimes I'd see the sun scythe across the sky in mere minutes, from dawn to dusk. Other times I'd get stuck in an eternal twilight, with no daybreak at all. My phone was a cold, dead brick. My watch displayed nonsense. I used the moss on trees to guess north, but the forest wound me back again and again to the same clearing. Each time I emerged into the clearing, I glimpsed the cabin. In some bizarre loops, it looked old, half collapsed, covered in vines as though decades had passed. In others, it was brand new, better constructed than I'd ever managed. I once even saw a version of it with a pickup truck parked out front. That truck blinked out of existence when I blinked. I started hearing Kane's voice whenever the wind gusted. He whispered secrets about my father, my ex-wife, my regrets, all in that calm, mocking tone. He'd appear on the ridgeline at sunset, vanish if I tried to approach. It was on the 4th or 5th day of this looping torment that I discovered something that nearly stopped my heart. I was stumbling through a rocky creek bed when I spotted a shape protruding from a hollow log. It looked like an arm. My pulse spiked and I carefully crept forward. The stench of rot hit me, making my stomach churn. Inside the log, I saw a man's body. At first, I recoiled in horror. Then I realized the man was me, or at least a version of me. His hair was mine, his face was mine, but his eyes were sealed shut with black resin. His mouth hung open in a silent scream. The flesh was in advanced decay, crawling with insects, but the clothes were near identical to what I wore. This corpse twitched once, like a muscle spasm, then lay still. I scrambled away, retching. It's not real, I tried to tell myself, but I couldn't believe it. Maybe these were all possible outcomes for me, scattered through time. The sense that I was trapped in some cyclical hell tormented me. That evening, or maybe the next, I collapsed from exhaustion in an open glade. When I came to, the night was silent, moonless, but I sensed I wasn't alone. I rolled to my knees and discovered a figure crouched near me. At first, I thought it was Kane, but as I held my breath and let my eyes adjust, I realized it was my wife. I'd know her silhouette anywhere, the curve of her cheek, her dark hair, but she was drenched. Water dripped from her clothes, pooling around her feet. Her head was bowed. My voice came out hoarse, trembling. "Rebecca?" She lifted her face, pale, lips parted, water streaming from her eyes like tears, but she nodded, a heartbreakingly small motion. "Liam," she whispered. "Liam, help me." I half lunged forward, breath caught in my chest. "How? Why are you?" "We were divorced, had been for a year. She'd left me, said I was shutting her out. She'd taken her things, but I never stopped loving her. And now she was here, soaked to the bone, looking so fragile." My mind screamed at me that this was another trick, but the sight of her overcame me, and I knelt in front of her. She smelled like rain, but also something older, like stagnant water. Her arms trembled, and she whispered, "I'm cold." I reached out, gently pressing a hand to her shoulder. Ice-cold flesh. Still, it was her face, her voice. My eyes filled with tears. "Rebecca, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." She moved closer, leaning into my chest. Water soaked my shirt, but I didn't care. For a moment, it felt like a second chance. I kissed the top of her head. "How did you get here?" I asked. "It's not safe." She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her cheek to my neck. One of her hands slid up my side, nails scraping. It felt too rough, but I tried to ignore it. "I missed you," she breathed. I closed my eyes. But when she spoke again, the voice was different, deeper. "Tell me, you dream about drowning me, don't you?" Chills raked my spine. I pulled back, but her arms locked around my neck, unnaturally strong. She raised her face, eyes flaring red. Her lips parted in a too-wide grin, and she spoke in Kane's voice. "We can rewrite the ending, together." I screamed and shoved her. She tumbled back with an unearthly shriek. The moment she landed, her body broke apart like a water-soaked rag doll, dissolving into a viscous black puddle that sank into the ground. I stumbled away on all fours, panting, mind reeling. My entire shirt was wet, and my chest burned where she'd touched me. When I forced myself to stand, I spotted Kane by a tree. He gave me a slow, mocking clap. I ran. The forest turned into a surreal labyrinth, the dark shapes of trees stretching like tall skeletons. Somewhere, I heard the echo of my own voice calling out as if from behind me. The wind whipped up leaves in a spiral, and the moon soared across the sky in seconds, plunging me into night, then into a ghostly dawn. Eventually, I broke free of the tree line, falling onto a dirt road. Relief shot through me, some sign of civilization, but that relief was short-lived. I recognized this road. It was the same half-overgrown route that led to my cabin, only it usually looked far more remote. Now, it stretched in the wrong direction, opening up into a wide path that absolutely should not exist. I coughed, sputtering, and forced my exhausted limbs to keep going. That's when I spotted a battered wooden sign that read, "Rock Castle Forest, Fire Danger Low." I'd seen that sign near a ranger station once, but it was miles away from my property. The road sloped downward, leading me to a small parking area. A single battered ranger truck sat there. My chest soared with a flicker of hope. I limped as fast as I could, tears of relief burning my eyes. I was half out of my mind with exhaustion, but if a real ranger was there, maybe I could get help. Maybe I could get out of this time-warped forest. I reached the driver's side door and pounded on it. "Help!" I cried. "Please, I need help." The door opened. A ranger in a wide-brim hat leaned out, then turned to look at me. I recognized that face. It was Kane's. Even the grin was the same. "Need a ride?" he asked softly. With a strangled gasp, I stumbled back. Kane climbed out of the truck, adjusting his uniform. He looked official, every detail from the badge to the boots. "What? How?" I croaked. "Relax," he said, stepping forward. "We can end this. Stop running. I'll take you wherever you want to go. You just have to—" I never let him finish. My mind snapped. I saw red. With a primal scream, I scooped up a large rock from the dirt road and hurled it at his head. He dodged easily, but it made him retreat half a step. That was enough for me to lunge and grab the truck door. I slammed it shut and locked it from the inside. He laughed, stepping to the window. "Come now, Liam. You can't drive away from this." But I was already twisting the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, unbelievably. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I pressed the accelerator, though the truck jerked in protest. I'd driven stick shifts before, but this felt alien. The gear shift stuck, the pedals resisted. Even so, it moved forward. Kane walked alongside, eyes blazing in the side mirror. He might have been letting me do it, maybe humoring me. But I saw no other chance, so I pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine coughed, then lurched down the road. Dirt spewed from the tires. I glanced in the rearview mirror, heart in my throat. The road behind me shimmered like a mirage. Kane stood there watching. But then, impossibly in a blink, he was gone. Trees whipped past me in the headlights. I didn't question how the truck had a half tank of fuel. I just drove, ignoring the pain in my ankle, ignoring the throbbing in my chest. The forest parted to reveal a narrow, twisting stretch of blacktop. It was slick with rain, but definitely a paved route. A sign read, "Route 1956. I slammed on the brakes, breathing in stunned disbelief. This was a real road, it had to be. I turned onto it, trying to keep my eyes on the lines that glistened in the headlights. No other cars appeared. At one point, I thought I saw a flicker of sun overhead, but then the sky went black again. My watch read 3:12 p.m., but that meant nothing. Eventually, the truck's headlights illuminated a weathered sign that read, "Rest area ahead, 1 mile." I almost cried from relief. A rest area was a sign of normalcy. Yet, as I approached, the rest area building looked deserted. The windows were boarded, and the sign out front was missing letters. I cut the engine and sat there in the driver's seat, every nerve jangling. The silence weighed on me. I tried the radio, static. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. "We've done this before. You always end it the same way." Kane's voice. I shut off the radio and felt bile rise in my throat. I stumbled out of the truck. My ankle screamed, but I forced myself to hobble across the deserted asphalt. The rest area's lights flickered overhead. The door to the building was ajar, revealing a musty interior. Vandalized or just abandoned, I couldn't tell. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed, "Anyone here?" I heard a shuffling sound down the hallway, where bathrooms usually are. Without a better plan, I limped forward, the overhead lights flickering like a dying strobe. Shadows jumped across the grimy walls. Then a figure stepped out. A man dressed in the tattered remains of an old flannel. Blood coated his neck, caked in the fabric. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He looked at me. I recognized him in an instant. It was me again, though older. Gray streaked his hair. A gash ran across his forehead. He parted his mouth in a silent moan. "No," I whispered, backing away. "No, no, no." The double lurched forward. Something glistened in his mouth. Broken teeth or bone shards, I couldn't be sure. He reached out for me, a pitiful gesture. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed against the floor with a dull thud. I turned and ran, ignoring the pain, stumbling back into the night air. Out in the parking lot, the truck was gone. A single set of footprints led from where it had been to a lamppost. Kane stood under that lamppost, his face cast in half shadow. I wanted to scream, but my throat was raw. "Why are you doing this to me?" I demanded, half sobbing. Kane didn't move. "Because you let me in," he said. "You needed me. You asked for a way out of your misery, and here we are." I fell to my knees, anger mixing with despair. "What do you want?" He took a few measured steps toward me. In the flicker of the lamp, I noticed his features were shifting slightly, edges too sharp, eyes too deep. "I want to close the cracks in your soul, or widen them as it pleases me. I want you to realize you cannot outrun yourself, or me." I crawled backward, tears streaming. "If you're the devil, just kill me, get it over with." A quiet laugh. "Am I the devil? Perhaps, but do you really think death is the worst that can happen?" He stooped down, his face inches from mine, and in that moment, I saw behind his eyes. I saw endless black, swirling with shapes, half-formed bodies, screaming faces. Bear was there. My father was there. Everyone I'd hurt, everyone I'd lost. They flickered like images in a funhouse mirror, twisted with agony. I couldn't breathe. My mind cracked. Kane whispered, "Let me fix it. The heartbreak, the guilt, the anger. You can walk away from here. You can have your dog again, your wife again, a perfect cabin. Just say yes." Some primal survival instinct made me recoil. I remembered Bear's mutilated body. I remembered the illusions of my rotting doppelgangers. My wife's face contorted by Kane's voice. None of it was real. If I said yes, I'd be trapped in a deeper lie. I forced strength into my voice. "Never." He sighed, in almost theatrical disappointment. Then he grabbed me by the hair, yanked me upright. His grip felt like molten metal on my scalp. I screamed. "Have it your way," he said. The next instant, I was hurled onto the ground. My body felt battered, as though I'd fallen from a great height. I realized we were back at the cabin clearing. The cabin was in flames, exactly as I had tried to make it before, the heat blasting me even from yards away. I heard the timbers crack, sparks swirling in the air. The sky was dark, starless. Kane let go of me. My scalp felt scorched. I scrabbled for any weapon. My hand closed around a long, half-burned iron rod lying among the ashes, likely the fireplace poker or a piece of rebar. The end glowed with the residual heat. He stepped closer, looming in front of the blazing cabin, his face lit by the inferno. "That's it then. Fight me. Let's see what that accomplishes." Adrenaline flared. Grief, terror, rage, all fused. I gripped the iron rod and lunged with a wounded roar. Kane caught it with his bare palm, but this time I saw him flinch. The tip burned into his flesh, producing black, oily smoke. His eyes flashed wide with something like surprise or pain. He yanked the rod aside, but I used the moment to smash the glowing tip into his side. An unearthly screech tore from his throat, an explosion of embers spraying the air. His body convulsed, revealing black tissue beneath torn clothing as if he were made of living ash. For once, it felt like I'd actually hurt him. "Liam!" he hissed, his voice cracking. I ignored it, continuing the assault with desperate ferocity. My next strike glanced off his shoulder, but the heat seared more of that black flesh. He screamed again, a sound that reverberated through the trees, making them tremble. The iron rod cracked in half under some invisible force, flying out of my hands. But I'd done enough damage to see him stagger. Kane glared at me. His face, half burned away, revealed something monstrous beneath. Where half of his features were that same handsome visage, the other half was a roiling mass of cinders and blazing eyes. "You think you can beat me?" I tasted blood in my mouth. "I don't know, but I sure as hell won't roll over." Smoke poured from his wounds. The flames from the cabin twisted, swirling into him as if fueling his form. He lunged too fast and slammed me into the ground. My chest felt like it cracked under the impact. His molten hand clamped around my neck, scorching my skin. Spots danced in my vision. Summoning my last shred of energy, I drove my knee up into his gut. It probably hurt me more than him, but it loosened his grip an inch. I scrambled and grabbed the broken piece of the iron rod. With one last burst of will, I jammed it upward into his burnt torso. Kane shrieked. A torrent of black smoke erupted from his mouth and eyes. He stumbled back, dropping me. I coughed, gasping for air, feeling my neck sizzling with a burn. He straightened, unsteady. The rod was still buried in him, spewing smoke. "We can do this forever," he managed, though his voice sounded ragged, laced with fury and agony. I spat blood, tears burning my eyes. "Let me out," I said, my voice trembling, "or I'll keep fighting." Kane's lips twitched in a grin, but it was flickering now, uncertain. He took a step toward me, then wavered. I could almost see the battle raging in whatever he was. He swayed, then blurred like a bad TV signal. Suddenly, he was gone. I collapsed to the ground, hugging my ribs. My head spun. The cabin continued to burn, the heat scorching my face. I half expected time to reverse or illusions to appear. But for a few moments, nothing changed. Slowly, I forced myself to stand. My chest blazed with pain, and each breath rattled. But I was alive. I stumbled toward the tree line, half expecting it to shift and loop me back. But it didn't. The forest parted. The silhouette of a road lay just beyond. I looked back at the cabin for a final time, flames licking the sky, beams crumbling. My life's dream reduced to ash. Bear was gone, never properly buried. My soul felt hollow at that thought, but I whispered a goodbye under my breath. I forced myself to move, step by agonizing step. The forest felt different, less oppressive. The wind carried only the natural hush of rustling leaves. No sign of Kane. I limped until I found an old gravel track. My footfalls crunched on the rocks, echoing in the eerie stillness. At some point, I reached a real state highway, where a battered green sign read, US 25. Headlights appeared from the distance, a truck. I nearly collapsed in front of it, waving my arms. The driver, a wide-eyed older woman, stopped in alarm. She rolled down her window, saw my burned neck, my wild eyes, and nearly backed away. But after a breathless explanation, she agreed to drive me to the nearest hospital in London, Kentucky. I looked back only once. The forest behind us was a black mass under the moonlight. It was quiet. No flicker of fire, no sign of that torment. But in the cold wind, I thought I heard a voice whisper my name. I wish I could say there was closure. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in a motel outside of London, nursing my wounds. Doctors couldn't make sense of the burn pattern on my neck. The local police went into Daniel Boone National Forest to investigate my report of a burning cabin, but they found no such property at the coordinates I gave. They asked if I'd had a mental health episode, but I just stared at them, hollow-eyed. Even the hospital staff suggested trauma had caused me to hallucinate. They recommended therapy. Maybe they're right. But as I run my fingers over the scar at my throat, I'm not so sure. The nightmares still come. The illusions of Bear pinned to a tree or my wife dripping black water. In those nightmares, Kane stands in the corner. Half of his face a perfect mask, the other half a roiling furnace. And sometimes in the early morning, I feel his presence like a chill in the room. He whispered once in my ear as I dozed at the motel, "We've done this before. You always end it the same way." I forced my eyes open to a silent, empty room, but the sense of dread remained. If you're reading this, believe me when I say there are places in the wilderness where something ancient, something cruel, waits for cracks in your soul. Once you let it in, even out of kindness or desperation, it may never truly leave. I escaped with my life, or a version of it. But I lost my friend, lost my home, and lost any certainty that time and reality are as solid as we want them to be. I don't know what Cain was. Devil, demon, shapeshifter, or just some cosmic embodiment of all the darkness we carry inside. But I do know this. If you're ever alone in the deep forests of Kentucky and a polite stranger comes knocking during a storm, be very careful. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. I'll keep moving on. I don't know if Cain will follow. The only thing I do know is that I'll never go back to that place. The memory alone is enough to curdle my blood. And wherever Cain might appear next, I pray you're stronger than I was. Or maybe I pray you never face him at all, because he is still out there, waiting, patient, whispering your secrets in the wind, smiling with too many teeth in the shadows, just beyond the safety of the roads and the lights, deep in the silence of Rockcastle Ridge. My name is Cassidy Harper. I'm 28 years old, and this happened in October of 2023, in the Red River Gorge area of Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest. I'm writing this with my left hand wrapped in bandages, my right arm in a sling, and an ache in my head that still hasn't left. It hurts to remember, but I have to get it down before the details slip away, or before something else finds me again. I suppose I should explain why I was there. I'm not a military veteran or anything like that. I've worked as a freelance graphic designer in Lexington for the past few years. My best friend, Emily Lang, who's 27, had insisted we both take time away from the city. I was coming out of a bad breakup. She said it would be good spiritual cleansing, a chance to reconnect with nature and ourselves. Em was big on that kind of thing. She believed in ley lines, spiritual energy, and all those cosmic forces I once thought were nonsense. I almost wish I could think that way again. But everything that happened proved there are darker powers out there, ones I would give anything to forget. We set out on a Friday morning. The air was crisp, the leaves turning gold, orange, and red. Fall in Kentucky can be heartbreakingly beautiful, and I felt my body relax the farther we drove from the city. Emily took the wheel as we left the main highway and wound down smaller roads into the gorge. She was talkative, excited. She'd done a bit more actual wilderness camping than me, but neither of us was any kind of survivalist. I'd never been big on roughing it. I thought, well, I've got my phone, a backup battery, a good map app, a compass if things got dicey. And of course, Emily was prepared with her herbal teas, crystals, and a battered old topographic map. I remember the first moment something felt off. We were about 20 minutes from the campsite near Courthouse Rock, this big sandstone formation that's popular with hikers. The GPS on my phone started spinning, telling us to turn in loops, then it lost signal entirely. Em tried her phone. Same issue, plus the battery plummeted from 80% to 20 in minutes. I shrugged it off, figuring the signal out there was just bad, but I got this strange flutter in my stomach. Then Em looked at me, half joking, half serious, and asked, "Do you ever feel like the forest is watching?" "Em, stop," I said with a nervous laugh. "Don't freak me out already." She just grinned, but the corners of her mouth stayed lifted a little too long. I thought maybe I was imagining it, so I brushed it off. We arrived at a small gravel parking lot near one of the trailheads, grabbed our gear, and hiked in. The forest was beautiful. Towering trees in autumn color, a breeze that carried the scent of pine needles, and the trail mostly empty except for the occasional distant sound of other hikers. After a couple of miles, Emily pointed off-trail, saying she knew a more secluded spot where we could pitch our tents. I trusted her. She usually had a good sense of direction, and I was excited to find that secret place she raved about. We walked another hour or so, and everything started to look the same. Massive sandstone boulders, thick stands of hemlock, the ground strewn with wet leaves. I noticed that the forest grew quieter. Fewer birds, fewer scuttling animals. It was as if we'd slipped outside the usual domain of hikers and wildlife. We found a flat spot near a small creek. Emily suggested we camp there. The first day was fine. We got the tents up with no problem, collected wood, and built a little fire. We made coffee, rummaged through some energy bars for dinner. The only unsettling bit was how my phone's battery went from 50% to dead almost instantly, without even a low battery warning. I tried turning it on a few times, but it wouldn't even give me the usual beep. Emily's phone was also drained. I shrugged, telling myself I'd be forced to actually unplug for once in my life. Night fell quickly, and the stars overhead were bright. After so many nights near city lights, it was beautiful to see them in full clarity. Emily rummaged through her backpack, pulled out a little bundle of dried sage and tossed some into the fire, saying it was for positive vibes. The flames flickered green. I assumed it had to do with the chemicals in the sage or something. I remember a weird feeling that the glow lasted too long, like the color had a life of its own. Maybe that was the first sign, or maybe I was just on edge. We talked for a while about random stuff, my breakup, her job at the bookstore, her new interest in local folklore. I noticed how she kept looking into the trees behind me, her eyes flicking back and forth. At one point, she said, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard anything. Silence. Then I heard a low rustle like leaves shifting underfoot. But when I turned, I saw nothing. We settled into our tents, which we pitched side by side. Em wrote in her journal by headlamp, and I drifted off, thinking about nothing but the next day's plans. I awoke to the sound of snapping twigs outside. My eyes flew open. It was dark, dead of night, though I couldn't see my watch in the pitch black. For a moment, I thought I heard whispering, like distant voices. I held my breath, trying to pick them out, but there was only silence. Then a breeze rippled the tent, and I swear it carried a breathy laugh. The next morning, I found my sleeping bag unzipped. I normally bundle up tight. October nights can get chilly, but the zipper was undone from the inside. That unsettled me because I didn't remember doing it. My boots were also askew, as if someone had moved them. I asked Em how she'd slept, and she admitted that she heard a voice outside, but she assumed it was just her imagination, or maybe me talking in my sleep. We decided to explore more of the forest that day. Emily was determined to find some old rock formation called the Rock House, which she'd read about in some obscure local blog. I teased her about her urban legend hunts, but she was serious. She said the Rock House was rumored to be a place used for dark gatherings in the 1800s, something about a local witch trial. I thought that was ridiculous, but I was game to check out something spooky. It was nearly Halloween after all. We packed up our small day bags, water, snacks, a first aid kit, anything we might need for a short hike. I took a paper map with me, the same battered old topographic one Em had. It was weird, though. When we tried to confirm our location, the lines on the map seemed off, like the place we were in didn't match. Our vantage points didn't align with the lines on the map. It was like the land had shifted or the map was for a slightly different location. Emily shrugged it off, said maybe it was an older version or we'd read it wrong. Eventually, we just started walking deeper into the forest. A couple of hours passed, and we hadn't found this rumored stone hut. We also didn't come across any other hikers, which was odd for a fall weekend. The day was growing dim, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. My internal sense of time told me it was late afternoon, but my watch insisted it was just 10 a.m. That was impossible, because we'd already been hiking for what felt like half the day. I tapped the watch, shook it, but the hands kept pointing to 10 o'clock. Emily's watch read 2:20 p.m. We stared at each other, unsettled, but brushed it off as some weird glitch. Looking back, that was more than a glitch. Time itself had started peeling at the edges. We pushed on and finally spotted a large sandstone structure rising out of the ground, half buried in moss and twisted vines. It wasn't large, more like a squat stone cabin, maybe 10 feet tall, with a crude doorway. The roof was made of layered stones, sealed with decades or centuries of grime. Emily grinned, her eyes glowing. "I think that's the rock house," she said. We approached it carefully. The opening was big enough for us to duck inside, though the smell that wafted out was damp and pungent, like old mud and rotted leaves. The interior was dark, but from what little light filtered in, we could see faint carvings along the walls. Mostly, they were odd symbols, swirls, crosses, star shapes. Some looked like random scratches. There was a circle on the far wall with a crudely drawn figure in the center, lines radiating out like spider legs. I ran my fingers over it. The stone felt cold, almost wet. Emily dug out her flashlight and swept the beam over the ceiling. Dried bundles of herbs hung there, tied with fraying cords. They rattled softly, as if disturbed by a breeze we couldn't feel. My heart pounded. Something was very wrong about the place. I felt like the air had changed pressure, pushing against my ears. Emily muttered, "This is incredible." She took a step deeper. I wanted to leave right away, but a part of me was fascinated. We'd stumbled onto something that felt ancient and taboo, as though we weren't supposed to be there. I remember whispering, "Let's just get out, okay?" But Emily was already leaning in to examine the carvings. "Cass, look," she said, pointing the flashlight beam near the base of the wall. I bent down and saw letters scratched into the rock, repeated over and over. D-E-L-L-A. They looked more recent than the other carvings, as if someone had come here to memorialize that name many times, maybe centuries after the original symbols. "Probably the name of whoever did this," I said, but something in my gut told me that wasn't quite right. The repetition looked compulsive, frenzied. The wind picked up outside, a moan that almost sounded like a woman crying. Then, out of nowhere, my flashlight flickered and died. Emily's did too. The interior plunged into thick darkness. My panic jumped tenfold, and I grabbed Emily's arm. "We need to go," I said firmly. We retreated outside, hearts thumping. Once we were back in the open, the flashlight beams both returned as if nothing had happened. We tried shining them inside again, and they flickered off. Emily murmured about electromagnetic fields. I was more worried about the possibility of black mold or carbon monoxide or something less supernatural and more physically dangerous. Either way, I wanted to leave. We turned back the way we came, or so we thought. But after walking maybe 15 minutes, we ended up right back at the stone hut. Emily frowned and joked, "Guess my sense of direction's off." We tried a different route, climbing up a small ridge. Another half hour or so, and we emerged into the same clearing again, the rock house squatting there. My lungs felt tight. No matter which path we took, we circled back, as if the forest were funneling us toward that sinister building. It was getting dark again. We decided maybe it would be safest to set up camp nearby instead of wandering in circles through the night. The idea scared me, but it beat stumbling blindly into ravines. We lit a small fire about 20 yards away from the rock house, making sure we could still see its silhouette in the gloom. A thick fog had begun seeping through the trees, swirling around the stones. The shapes hanging from the hut's ceiling rattled in the faint breeze, though we heard no other sounds of wildlife. Emily and I huddled by the fire. My appetite vanished, but I forced down some dried fruit. Our canteens both tasted off, metallic. I told Emily it was probably just the local water we'd filtered, but she gave me a worried look. After we'd eaten, we unrolled our sleeping bags, intending to sleep under the stars for the night. Neither of us wanted to be enclosed in the tent for some reason. It felt like we needed to see all around us if something happened. The firelight flickered in shades of red, orange, and green again. I tried to keep it stoked, tossing on whatever dry wood I could find, but the logs rotted quickly. I'm not exaggerating. Pieces of bark that had been solid minutes before softened, as if waterlogged, and crumbled to dust. That spongy decay spread so fast it made me recoil. Emily watched in wide-eyed fascination. I saw it as a sign to run, but there was nowhere else to go. Somewhere past midnight, I heard Emily muttering in her sleep. She sounded distressed, so I reached out and shook her gently. Her eyes flew open, and for a moment, they reflected the fire as if they were mirrors. That illusion vanished, but she stared at me with such strangeness that I almost yelped. "Em, you okay?" I whispered. She looked around, confused, as if not remembering who I was. Then something in her gaze softened and she said, Yeah, sorry, bad dream." I tried to settle back down, nerves on edge. The wind moaned again. The forest was full of illusions that night. Leaves swirling, shadows twisting. I drifted in and out of shallow sleep until dawn. When morning came, assuming it was morning, because the sky was just a bruised purple, I found that our small supply of bread had grown fuzzy mold. Our canteens were still half full, but the water smelled rancid. Emily noticed her backpack was missing. We spotted it about 100 yards away, sitting upright, the straps arranged neatly. It was almost as if someone had carried it there. Inside, we discovered that some of her clothes were shredded to rags, but with no signs of bite marks or claws, just a methodical slicing. My stomach twisted at the implication that a human, or something with human-like intelligence, had done it. Emily was shaken, but she tried to pretend it was just raccoons. I couldn't pretend so easily. It was that afternoon, if it was truly afternoon, when Emily said she wanted more firewood and walked off. I told her not to go far, but she insisted it would be quick. The light had a dim, grayish cast that could have been late afternoon or early morning. Time felt meaningless. My watch displayed 10 o'clock still, and Emily's read 2:20. It was as though the entire forest refused to obey normal rules. Minutes passed. Then an hour. I tried calling her name, wandering in circles, but everything was silent except for the wind and the rustle of branches. Panic set in. I decided to check inside the rock house, though the thought made my skin crawl. I stepped in only a foot or two, shining my flashlight around. The same carvings on the walls, except I noticed more had been added. My name, Cassidy, scrawled over and over as if etched by fingernails. That wasn't there before. My breathing turned shallow, and I burst back out into the open air near tears. Night fell, or so I assumed from how the sky darkened further. No sign of Emily. My fear soared. I found a large, fallen branch I could use as a weapon, just in case. The unnatural sense of being watched grew so intense that sometimes I froze. Sure, someone stood right behind me, but there was no one. I tried to build a small fire, but the flames kept sputtering out, as if the wood was too wet. I cowered there in the near darkness, tears streaking my face, calling Emily's name. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Relief and terror collided, and I jumped up, brandishing my makeshift club. Emily walked into the flickering firelight. She had her arms full of wood logs, stacked unnaturally high, like an impossible weight she was carrying. She looked off. She was smiling, lips parted too wide, showing a row of perfectly white teeth, and her eyes were slightly glazed over. "Oh my God, Emily!" I screamed. I ran to her, but she just stood, arms outstretched with the wood. It fell to the ground in a clatter. One log nearly landed on her bare foot, yet she didn't flinch. I tried hugging her, but her body was stiff. Her clothes were dirty, her hair tangled with leaves, and her face bore shallow scratches. "Where were you?" I asked frantically. She didn't answer. She just stared, blinking maybe once every half-minute. Finally, she said, "I was getting firewood." Her voice had a slight echo to it, as though we were in a tunnel. And then that smile grew even wider, so unnatural I had to look away. Are you okay?" I asked. Fear trickled through my veins. I repeated her name. She didn't seem to recognize it. She set her gaze on me. For a moment, her face softened and she whispered, "Cass." Then she shook her head like a dog shaking off water, and the glassiness returned. "We need to stay," she said, as if reciting. "We need to feed her." I froze. "Feed who?" I managed. She didn't reply. Instead, she pointed to the rock house, that looming shape behind us. The night that followed remains one of the worst in my life. Emily sat rigidly by the fire, occasionally poking at it with a stick. Sometimes she'd ask me random questions, like, "How do you know your name?" Or, "Do you remember when you were 6?" Or, "Where did we meet?" Strange, personal questions that made me feel extremely uncomfortable. She seemed to forget entire pieces of our lives together. She repeated certain phrases. "We need to stay. Della wants a body. Who are you? Who are you?" in a cyclical, murmuring chant. I tried to coax her into sleeping, but she just stared at the swirling embers. At some point, I dozed off in terror, exhausted. I woke to a scraping sound. Emily was squatting near my sleeping bag, carving something into the dirt with a sharp stone. I peered closer, heart hammering, and realized she was writing Cassidy over and over, just like inside the rock house. I demanded she tell me what she was doing. She looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "It's your name. I have to fill the pages." I swallowed thickly and thought of leaving her behind and running. But the forest was uncharted to me and I couldn't abandon her. She was my best friend, even if she wasn't acting like it. And something told me I'd never make it out on my own. My compass, my map, everything was worthless. The forest seemed to distort itself, refusing to let me go. The next morning, if it was morning, I forced Emily to eat some of our remaining trail mix. I tried to lighten the mood, tried to talk to her about normal things. She'd respond in clipped, monotone sentences, or else whisper to herself. When I took her hand, I felt how cold it was. Her fingernails had a grayish tint and looked cracked. One was halfway peeled off. I almost gagged. Despite my terror, I wanted to try one more time to find a path out. I told Emily we should go. She shook her head. "She needs us here." Suddenly, her eyes rolled back and she seized my arm. Her grip was shockingly strong. "You can't leave," she hissed in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all. Then she blinked, releasing me. "I mean, you shouldn't leave," she corrected in that eerie, echo-laden tone. My skin was crawling. Without warning, she lunged at me. A flash of movement, and I saw she had a branch sharpened into a crude blade. My instincts took over, and I scrambled back, catching a gash across my forearm as the weapon grazed me. Blood slicked my sleeve, and she giggled, an utterly inhuman sound before stepping back. I screamed at her, "What the hell are you doing?" Her expression flickered, momentarily consumed by horror. "Cass, oh God, I'm sorry," she said in her normal voice, tears brimming in her eyes. Then her face went blank again, and her lips curled into that dreadful, too-wide smile. "Elder Della says we can't let you leave," she whispered. Something in me snapped. I grabbed the nearest rock and waved it at her, half to keep her at bay, half to show I wasn't defenseless. My arm throbbed with pain, warm blood still dripping. Emily laughed in that doubled voice again, and then she retreated, pacing around the rock house. Her posture was contorted, her head lolling sometimes. She muttered nonsense phrases. "Time is a circle. Blood in the leaves. She sees, she sees." I clutched my rock, adrenaline spiking, tears in my eyes. My friend was gone, or something had taken her. I didn't know how to fight it, but I had to try. I can't fully explain why I didn't simply run into the woods in blind panic. Partly, I was afraid of the forest's unnatural looping. Partly, I was determined to save Emily if I could. A sick, clinging hope that she could still be rescued. My bandage from the first aid kit slowed the bleeding in my arm, but I was getting woozy. I rummaged through what remained of our supplies. Most of the food was spoiled. The water was stale and carried a rank odor. I forced a few gulps down just to avoid dehydration. The day itself seemed stuck in twilight, neither bright nor fully dark. The trees cast weird, elongated shadows that twisted every time I glanced away. My sense of time was shredded beyond recognition. Emily circled the campsite like a predator, occasionally scuttling away behind logs or boulders, then returning, always with that grin. Her nails fell off one by one. She seemed not to notice. In that moment, she was less a friend and more an unearthly puppet. Eventually, I realized she was herding me toward the rock house door. Every time I tried to sidestep, she'd appear on that side, brandishing her sharpened branch, that hungry smile plastered on her face. She said, "Go inside, she's waiting." Her voice warbled as if two distinct vocal cords spoke in unison. I backed away, terrified. But she cornered me. Sobs burned my throat. I gripped my rock, and with a surge of desperation, I bashed her in the shoulder. She let out a shriek that didn't sound human. Blackish fluid oozed from the wound instead of blood. She stared at it with mild curiosity, then at me, as if analyzing. Then she lunged again, swiping for my face. I darted back, raising the rock, and slammed it into her side. She buckled, collapsing onto the leaf-littered ground. For a moment, I thought I had subdued her. Then she moved unnaturally, twisting like a bug pinned under glass. Her neck craned, eyes wide, mouth spewing curses in a language that sounded archaic. She seized my ankle, yanked me down. I scrambled, screaming, kicking at her. I could feel her nails, what was left of them, digging into my leg, drawing blood. I managed to pull free and grabbed a heavy fallen branch. I smashed it into her leg once, twice. I heard a horrifying crack, and she let out a shriek that echoed in the clearing. Gasping, I stumbled upright and tried to run away, not caring that I had no idea where I was going. But the forest closed in. Within minutes, I was back in the same clearing, facing the rock house again, as if I'd never left. Emily, or that thing wearing Emily's skin, was dragging herself toward the stone structure, moaning in agony. I realized with dawning horror that I was the one who had inflicted that pain. It was for self-defense, but seeing my friend crippled like that made me retch. Yet she kept going, pulling herself on her elbows, blackish slime staining the dirt. Something in me knew that if the rock house was the source of this evil, then maybe destroying it would break the hold it had on Emily, or at least it would buy me time to escape. I thought of the small bottle of alcohol-based stove fuel we had in our supplies. I rummaged until I found it. My body shook with both fear and determination. I had no illusions about my survival if I did nothing. Emily would eventually kill me, or wear me like a puppet. I crept up to the rock house door, the bottle in hand, the lighter in my pocket. Emily saw me and snarled like a rabid animal, dragging herself faster, leaving a wet trail behind. As I stepped inside, I was enveloped by that suffocating damp stench. The carvings glistened in the gloom. My flashlight flickered, but it was enough to see newly added lines etched in the walls. More repeated names, including Emily's. And yes, my own name, scratched so many times it formed a swirling pattern. I tried to ignore it. My ears rang with a chorus of whispers. Or maybe it was just my terrified mind. I splashed the flammable liquid on the stone walls and on the brittle dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. I pressed the lighter, and the flame danced. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to bring that tiny spark into contact with the soaked surfaces. Fire erupted with a whoosh, bright and instantly massive. It licked across the herbs, blackening them in seconds. An acrid smoke filled the rock house. Coughing and sputtering, I staggered back outside. Emily was nearly at the threshold. The moment the flames rose, she let out a piercing, keening wail. I saw the reflection of orange fire in her wide eyes. Then her expression warped, contorting in pain or fury. She crawled forward and I screamed, "Stay away!" She was too close. We grappled, a wild tangle of limbs. She latched onto my shoulders, trying to pull me down. In that instant, I saw her features shift. Her face warped into something with sunken cheeks, hollow eye sockets, and cracked lips. I recognized it from the shapes in the carvings. The visage of Elder Della, the presence haunting the rock house. I struggled, pinned under her. The heat from the fire behind me grew stifling and the thick smoke billowed out, swirling around us. My lungs burned. With a desperate burst of energy, I twisted free, grabbed a rock, and smashed it down on Emily's legs. Once, twice, again, screaming in terror. Bones splintered, she howled, that black fluid spraying the ground. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever done. The next seconds blurred. I remember stumbling to my feet, tears streaming, while Emily, legs mangled, still tried to crawl. She was unstoppable, her voice rising in a guttural screech. "You can't leave. She has you now. She has your time." The flames roared behind us, higher than I thought possible, but the stone refused to collapse. It only glowed with an eerie light. I saw shapes in the smoke, faces or silhouettes swirling past. I did the only thing I could do. I ran. This time the forest seemed to shift in my favor, or maybe Elder Della was too occupied by the destruction of her lair. I stumbled through the undergrowth, my eyes streaming tears from the smoke. Branches raked at my arms. Time lost all meaning again. I might have run for hours or just a few minutes. Eventually, I broke through a thicket and spotted a dirt service road. I never found that road on any map, but there it was, weaving out from the forest. My energy spent, I collapsed in the middle of it. When I woke, I was in a dimly lit cabin. A stranger was leaning over me, a man with a thick beard, wearing a brown ranger's uniform. He said his name was Martin and asked me who I was, how I'd gotten lost. I babbled about Emily, about the rock house, about something possessing her. The ranger looked baffled. Finally, he told me I'd been reported missing 6 weeks ago. I stared at him, uncomprehending. I'd only been gone, 3 or 4 days? They took me to a hospital in Stanton, Kentucky. The doctors said I was severely dehydrated, malnourished, that my right arm had multiple fractures from a blunt force. My left was infected from a deep slice across the forearm. They asked me if an animal attacked me. I told them I didn't remember everything, and maybe I don't, or maybe I'm just too afraid to share the rest. The rangers conducted a search, asked me repeatedly where to find my friend Emily. I tried to explain, but of course, it sounded insane. They never found any stone hut or any sign of Emily. The coordinates I gave them supposedly led to a rocky gorge with no structures. They found only some evidence that a campsite had been there. Charred rocks, a couple of tattered sleeping bags. I insisted the rock house existed. The memory of Emily's twisted body still haunts my nightmares. But the official conclusion was that we got lost. Emily must have fallen or succumbed to the elements. They suspect animals scattered her remains. I know better, but I said nothing. I was too exhausted, terrified, ashamed. I keep replaying those moments of violence in my head. I was discharged from the hospital after a few days of IV fluids and medication. The staff looked at me with pity and curiosity, but no one believed my story, even though I left out the worst details. They told me to contact a counselor, get help for my trauma. I'm sure they think it's all in my head. A week later, while I was alone in my tiny apartment, I turned on my phone. The same phone I'd thought was destroyed in the forest. It had somehow reappeared in my backpack after the rangers returned my items. My heart nearly stopped when it powered on. It shouldn't have any battery, but there it was, shining bright. A single notification lit up. New video saved. My hands shaking, I opened the video. It was me. At least, it looked like me. The surroundings were pitch black, except for a faint glow. My hair hung around my face in a stringy mess, and my eyes were wide and reflective, like an animal's caught in headlights. I was smiling, but it wasn't my smile. It stretched too far, my eyes barely blinking. "This is Cassidy," the figure on the screen whispered, "and I just wanted you to know. I never left." I dropped the phone in horror. When I picked it up again, the battery was at 0 and it refused to turn back on. I haven't slept well since. Sometimes I swear I see Emily's silhouette in the corners of my apartment, or hear her voice moaning from the closet. But I know it can't be real, unless this is real, unless Elder Della followed me, or latched onto me. Sometimes I wake up with the sleeping bag unzipped from the inside. Sometimes I find mold on my food within hours of buying it. My watch still stops at 10 o'clock for no reason, and I catch glimpses of my own reflection, smiling just a bit too widely for just a moment before reverting to normal. I've tried burning sage, sprinkling salt, reciting every protective chant I can find online. I even reached out to local historians about any record of a witch named Della. A few references popped up in old 19th century documents. A Della Marsh, who was accused of cursing local families, rumored to dwell in the gorge. She supposedly vanished before they could hang her. No official word on a stone hut or a shrine. Nothing that conclusively tells me how to undo this curse, if that's what it is. So I record all this, as best as I can, still in recovery. The scarring on my arm is hideous. The bandages chafe, reminding me of that awful day. I don't think I'll ever be the same. I think about Emily, her bright laughter, the way she used to make me herbal tea when I was sad. And I realize I killed whatever was left of her. Or maybe she died the moment that presence took her. That thought gives me nightmares. I'll never be sure if I robbed her of a chance to be saved. Sometimes I dream of the rock house, still burning, the smoke rising in columns. In those dreams, Emily crawls out, dragging broken legs, her head tilted back. She calls my name again and again, her voice layered with ancient echoes. Then I bolt awake in a cold sweat, clutching my bandaged arm. They tell me I'm free to move on. The authorities closed the missing persons case for Emily due to lack of evidence. My parents want me to come home and stay with them, but I can't settle anywhere for long without feeling like there's a second presence behind my eyes, peering out. I'm terrified to see if something inside me might be letting that witch slip through. Whenever I catch my reflection unexpectedly, I jerk away, afraid to see my lips twisting into that too-wide grin. That's all there is to it, I guess. I survived, at least physically. I escaped that damned place in the gorge, but the nightmares remain. The final horror is that nagging sense that I never truly left. I still feel the forest pressing in sometimes, the fleeting taste of rotted water on my tongue, the smell of burning herbs. Late at night, I swear I hear Emily's voice whispering in my ear, "She has your time, she has your time." And if I let my eyes wander too long, I catch that face in the mirror, older, the mouth parted in an awful smile. I wish I had a neat conclusion or some bravado about facing my fears. Instead, I exist in this state of dread, waiting for the next sign that Elder Della is near. Maybe she needs more from me. Maybe she'll drag me back to that cursed clearing or slip inside my mind, wipe away everything that makes me me. Maybe one morning, I'll look in the mirror and realize I'm the one who's come back wrong. I hope not. I want to believe I'm still me. But when the nightmares grow too loud, I remember that video on my phone. That twisted reflection of me, whispering that I never left. So maybe a part of me still lingers in that scorching rock house. Or maybe something from that rock house lingers in me. If you ever find yourself in Red River Gorge, and you stumble across a mossy little stone hut with carvings on the walls, for God's sake, turn around. Because I might be there, or Emily might be there, or worse yet, Elder Della might be waiting inside, and she's very, very hungry. My name is Claire Saunders. I'm 31 years old. This happened in October of 2023, deep in the heart of Kentucky's Red River Gorge. I'm writing it all down now because, to be perfectly honest, I don't know how much longer I can hold on to these memories. Some days, I wish they would all just slip away like a nightmare at dawn. Other days, I'm terrified they actually will. I needed to get away from Louisville in the worst possible way. I'd broken up with my boyfriend of 5 years after discovering he'd cheated. And not just once, but dozens of times with people I thought were acquaintances, even friends. We'd been living together, sharing finances, planning to buy a house. I needed a new environment, a place where my life could feel entirely different. So I decided to take off into the wild for a week with my German shepherd Milo, my only friend who never lied to me. Red River Gorge was supposed to be beautiful in October, right before the cold locked in. The leaves were turning from green to gold, and the last tourists were packing up, leaving behind relative solitude. I wanted that. Just the hush of the wind through the cliffs, the comfort of a roaring campfire, and my dog asleep at my feet. I'm not a survival expert. I'm a freelance graphic designer by trade, used to living in the city. But I'd always enjoyed weekend hikes, and I wasn't afraid of being alone. I left on a Tuesday, figuring the trails would be mostly empty during the week. 2 hours outside Louisville, I turned onto the winding roads leading toward Wolfe County, eventually arriving at the trailhead near Chimney Top Rock. The sky was a bright but pale blue, and the crisp air smelled faintly of wood smoke. I remember thinking it felt like coming home in some primordial sense. Milo, my 6-year-old German shepherd, practically vibrated with excitement. He loves car rides and new places, and I love seeing him happy. Grabbing my pack and a small tent, we headed into the gorge. The plan: hike deep enough into the forest to get true peace, camp for a couple of nights, then circle around to a known campsite near the river. Maybe do some journaling or photography, get my head on straight. The first day was normal, if a bit lonely. I had zero phone reception most of the time, which I expected. I still had a full battery and an external charger, so I wasn't worried about electronics dying. The air had a bite to it. I set up camp under some oak trees not far from a trickling creek. Milo explored while I built a small fire ring out of stones. He always stayed in sight, coming back to check on me every few minutes. The sun started sinking behind the tall cliffs around 5 o'clock. Dusk in the gorge can sneak up on you fast. I lit my fire and warmed a can of soup. Milo lay beside me, shifting occasionally. Ears perked at every forest sound. I ate, fed him some kibble, and started feeling comforted, as though the trees themselves were inviting me to forget all my heartbreak and just breathe. An hour or so later, I noticed Milo's posture. He stood up and stared into the darkness beyond our firelight, hackles raised. I paused, listening hard. At first, I assumed it was a raccoon or maybe a white-tailed deer, but he was fixated, not moving an inch, as if a predator lurked just out of sight. I didn't hear a twig snap, nor the rustle of leaves, nothing. But a chill skittered through my body. I forced a laugh. "It's okay, boy," I told him. "Probably just a deer." My voice sounded strangely loud in my own ears. Then, very faintly, I heard it, like someone sobbing miles away. My skin prickled so hard I felt like I was being grazed by static electricity. Before I could think, I grabbed my flashlight and shone it in the direction Milo was staring. The light caught on twisted trunks and underbrush. No eyes reflected back. Nothing leaped out. The sobbing sound stopped. Eventually, Milo relaxed, settling back down on his belly, though still half alert. We stayed up a while longer, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. It was that old sensation you get when someone stands behind your chair, an electric weight on your shoulders. When I finally crawled into my tent, I brought Milo with me. Normally, I let him roam a bit, or at least sleep outside on his own bed if he wants, but something about that night made me want him close. I zipped the tent, turned on a small lantern, and settled inside my sleeping bag. Exhaustion weighed on me, but I kept jolting awake every half hour or so. Each time, Milo was up and listening, ears swiveling to the slightest hint of movement. Somehow, dawn came faster than I expected. The sky was still a ghostly gray when I noticed something unnerving. My sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside. That might not sound weird, but I'm a light sleeper, and I tend to wrap myself tightly. Yet here it was, wide open, and I felt cold, like I'd been exposed to the night air. Milo was pacing the tent, whining softly. I stepped outside to gather kindling and realized my small campfire was just gone. Not as in burned out. The ring of stones was still there, but the ash was soaking wet, as though doused. The leftover charcoaled logs were half buried beneath damp leaves. It was as if someone had deliberately scattered them. I found footprints around the edge, or at least partial footprints, too small for me, and definitely too big to be a raccoon. I couldn't be sure if it was just my imagination or if an actual human had crept around. Still, that leftover sense of being watched had me packing up quickly. I decided to move on and find a new spot, something less vulnerable. I hiked all morning, following a trail that was usually well marked. But the trail markers seemed to vanish or fade. 1 minute, I'd see a bright orange blaze on a tree trunk. The next minute, I couldn't find another anywhere. Even the map on my phone wasn't matching. GPS flickered in and out, refusing to sync. Eventually, the phone drained faster than it should have, so I turned it off to save battery. The real map I'd brought with me looked correct, but the terrain felt subtly wrong. Elevations different. gullies where there should have been ridges. It made no sense. Milo and I ended up trudging through brush and thorns for an hour, heading in what I hoped was east. The canopy above dimmed the sunlight, as though storm clouds had rolled in, but the sky was actually cloudless when I caught glimpses of it through the leaves. I checked my watch at one point. 11:15 a.m. 20 minutes later, it was already getting dark. I assumed maybe it was nearing evening, but no. That same watch insisted it was 11:37 a.m. I tapped it, shook it, but it was working fine. I told myself we'd just lost track of time, but a raw anxiety gnawed my gut. Milo kept close, obviously sensing my stress. By the time I found a suitable clearing, I'd probably wandered 7 miles, though it felt like we were walking in loops. Twice, I swear I passed the exact same boulder shaped like a giant turtle's head. The clearing itself was decent, a patch of level ground near what looked like an old abandoned footbridge. Trees ringed the area. They looked older than any I'd seen in the gorge, twisted into near-human shapes with thick, knotted trunks. I set my pack down with relief and tried to start another fire, but no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to stay lit. The kindling would catch, burn greenish for a second, then sputter out. After 15 minutes, I had little to show for my efforts except a small wisp of smoke and a sickening feeling of dread. I gave up and unrolled my sleeping pad, deciding to rest a bit. That was my first big mistake of the day. I don't know how long I lay there staring at the sky, but when I sat up, the angle of the sun had changed drastically, as though hours had passed. My watch insisted it was only a few minutes. Milo had gone off somewhere, but I hadn't heard him bark or rustle. Panic surged in me. I called out his name, no response. Scrambling to my feet, I rushed into the woods calling for Milo. My heart hammered. He usually stayed close, so his silence alarmed me. Clawing my way through the brambles, I cursed myself for not leashing him. I yelled his name louder, to the point my throat hurt. Suddenly, I heard Milo whimper from behind me. I spun, expecting to see him bounding toward me, but there was only thick undergrowth. Confused, I hurried back the way I came, and nearly crashed into him as he emerged from a rotted log. He was soaked, as if he'd fallen into a creek. His eyes looked wild, and he had small cuts on his legs. I dropped to my knees and hugged him. "What happened to you, boy?" He just whined, trembling. I checked him for major injuries. No broken bones, just scratches and the general look of a dog who's had a bad scare. Then I noticed my campsite. It wasn't where I'd left it. Or, more accurately, it was my campsite, my backpack, my sleeping pad, my half-burned attempt at a fire. But the clearing itself seemed shifted. The trees were spaced differently, the undergrowth around the edges thicker. It was as if the forest had changed shape in the short time I was gone. After calming Milo, I decided we needed to relocate. My instincts yelled at me to head back to civilization, but with the map and GPS on the fritz, I wasn't sure how. However, I did remember that if I went north, I should eventually run into a major trail that led out to the park roads. The day was a weird swirl of gloom and fleeting sunlight. I caught myself checking the position of the sun. It never seemed to move in a consistent arc. By the time I found a new campsite, it was late afternoon, I thought, and I was exhausted. We were near Chimney Top Rock, an iconic overlook. The vantage point gave me a sense of location. I set up the tent carefully, triple-checking the zippers this time. The plan was to rest for a bit, gather enough kindling before dark, and try once more for a campfire. I remembered the first night's chilling experience, but told myself it had been my imagination. That's when I heard footsteps on the trail. Quick, light steps coming toward us. Milo tensed, ears pricked. I grabbed his collar, not wanting him to run after a stranger. As the footsteps approached, I called out, "Hello," hoping it might be a friendly hiker. A woman stepped into view. I recognized her instantly, though I prayed I was wrong. Becca Taylor, my ex-best friend from high school and college. We'd parted on horrible terms 2 years ago, all because of an incident involving my ex. She'd lied to me about something massive, something that had effectively ended our friendship. But now, here she was, in the middle of the gorge, wearing hiking gear that looked too new and a faint smile that seemed glued on. "Claire, oh my God," she said in a bright tone, as though we'd just bumped into each other at a local coffee shop. "I can't believe this. What are the odds?" My pulse thundered in my ears. "Becca?" I didn't know how to respond. Part of me was angry, another part relieved to see another human after all the weirdness. She walked closer. Milo growled. He had never growled at her before, not back in the days when we were all friends. She tilted her head at him, that same stiff smile in place. "He doesn't like me, does he?" I wanted to ask how she'd even found me, but the question jammed in my throat. "He's just nervous. We've been hearing weird noises all night." Becca nodded too eagerly. "Yeah, the forest here can be strange. Mind if I stay with you for a night? I'm a little turned around. My phone died and I lost the trail." Her phone was dead. Just like mine was draining quickly, just like my map made no sense. "Sure," I said slowly, though every fiber of me wanted to say no. "You can, yeah, of course. I mean, there's space." She set down her pack. It was an expensive brand, almost pristine, with no signs of dirt or wear. Strange, given we were in the middle of a muddy gorge. I shrugged it off and got to work making a fire ring. If I was going to have company, I wanted at least a decent fire. This time, the flame caught. A little flicker of success. We sat around the fire in silence for a bit, Milo sticking close to me and occasionally letting out a quiet whine or growl in Becca's direction. She stared at the flames with rapt attention, as if mesmerized. Finally, I cleared my throat. "So, what are you doing here, Becca?" She turned her gaze to me. Her eyes reflected the flames in a way that unnerved me. "I was on a solo trip, believe it or not. Needed to get away from work drama. I've been in the area for a few days. Thought I recognized your voice earlier, so I followed it." It didn't sound plausible to me. The gorge was huge. The chance of randomly stumbling upon me was minuscule. But I was too tired to argue. Another wave of awkward silence passed. I tried to think of polite conversation, but it felt like we were strangers. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. In the distance, a coyote yipped. Becca muttered something I couldn't make out. Then I heard it again. The sobbing we'd heard the first night, only louder now. It resonated off the cliffs like someone in unimaginable pain. Milo lurched to his feet, hackles raised. The hair on the back of my neck shot up. Becca rolled her shoulders, as though relaxing into the cry. "Damn animals," she whispered. But coyotes don't sob, and it definitely sounded human. I wanted to question her, but I didn't. Instead, I tapped Milo to reassure him, stoking the fire higher to chase off the chill. The crying abruptly stopped. We decided to turn in soon after. I offered Becca my small 2-person tent, meaning Milo and I would sleep out under a tarp. She insisted I keep my own tent, that we should share the tent for safety. But the idea of being enclosed with her made me uneasy. I told her the dog wouldn't fit and left it at that. She didn't argue. Before dozing off, I heard her humming something. An old lullaby I vaguely recognized from childhood, but with the notes in the wrong order. The melody was jarring. Milo whined under the tarp, pressing his warm body against my hip. The night passed in a swirl of half-dreams, reminiscent of a fever. I woke to find my tarp had shifted. My sleeping bag lay wide open, again unzipped from inside. Milo was staring at me, ears back. The fire was out, though I had stacked extra wood before drifting off. More bizarre was the sky above. It was gray, almost evening-like, yet my watch said 6:12 a.m. Groggy, I dragged myself up to check on Becca. Her tent door was open, and she was gone. Her pack was inside, but it was half empty, the contents scattered. No sign of her. "Becca?" I called. No answer. A flicker of relief and worry mingled in my chest. Maybe she'd gone to gather wood or find a vantage point for cell reception. I decided to make use of the lull to check my own gear. My backpack was slightly damp, even though we hadn't had rain. I opened it and nearly recoiled. My spare clothes were rotting. Not just damp, actually sprouting spots of fuzzy mold, as if they'd been buried in wet earth for weeks. A rancid stench wafted up. Sickened, I tossed the clothes away from the camp. My jerky and canned goods looked fine, but the sight of the rotting clothes rattled me. None of this was natural. I reasoned maybe condensation had built up and gone unnoticed, but deep down, I knew that didn't explain mold blooming overnight. Milo growled suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. I turned to see a figure approaching through the trees. It was Becca, carrying an armload of sticks. Her expression was blank, her eyes distant. She moved with a mechanical, uneven gait. I stood up, heart pounding. "Where did you—" I started, but she cut me off by thrusting the sticks in my direction. "Found wood," she said, monotone. Her smile was too bright, too wide, as if pinned to her face. "We need a big fire, don't you think?" I stared at her. "Are you okay? You look like you might have hurt your ankle." She was favoring her right foot slightly. She blinked. "I'm fine, but I'm cold." And she wasn't wearing a coat, even though the temperature was probably in the 40s. She wore just a light flannel that looked oddly clean. No sign of morning dew. "Let's get the fire going," she repeated, her voice too cheerful. An itch in my brain told me something was catastrophically wrong. I tried to ignore it. "Sure," I said, forcing a grin. "Let's do that." We rebuilt the fire, and to my surprise, it caught quickly this time, flames dancing high. No greenish sputters. A normal, if robust, blaze. Becca sat close enough to singe her hair, but she didn't flinch from the heat. I awkwardly busied myself checking Milo's scratches. They seemed to be healing okay. That's when I noticed Becca staring at him intently, the corners of her mouth twitching. "He always was a good dog," she said in a low whisper, her eyes not leaving Milo's face. "You used to love him," I ventured. "Remember how you'd always joke about kidnapping him from me?" She turned her head slowly, gaze sliding over to me. "I still love him," she answered. But the way she said it made my stomach queasy, like the word had lost its meaning in her mouth. We didn't talk much after that. I warmed up some instant oatmeal, and she ate a bit, though not much. She acted like she'd forgotten how to use a spoon, lifting it to her mouth at odd angles. Then she set the spoon aside and stared at me. Her eyes were ringed by dark circles. "Do you remember your mother's funeral?" Becca asked abruptly. The question hit me like a punch. My mother had died when I was 12. Becca had come to the funeral with her parents. "Of course I do," I replied, unsettled. "Why?" Becca's lips parted, showing teeth. "Because you wouldn't stop crying. You sounded just like her." She trailed off as though the thought filled her with a twisted delight. My throat tightened. "Becca, what's going on with you? Something's not right." She shrugged, then stood, turning away from me. "I'll be back," she said. "Don't follow me." And she melted into the woods, the leaves barely rustling under her feet. I seized the chance. Heart thumping, I grabbed my gear and Milo, trying to pack as fast as I could. Whatever was wearing Becca's face, It wasn't my old friend. Maybe it was just stress or mental illness, but it felt deeper, more malevolent. My instincts roared for me to run. Halfway through packing, I heard a soft moaning from behind a thick oak. Against all better judgment, I went to check. I found nothing but old scratch marks on the trunk, as though something with claws had raked the bark. By the time I returned to the tent, Becca was there, standing over my pack. She looked calm, but her fingers twitched. "You're leaving?" she said flatly. I think so. Something weird is happening here. It's not safe." She took a breath, exhaled slowly. "You're right. It's not safe." In a single swift movement, she lunged at me, knocking me backward into the dirt. Milo barked furiously, trying to wedge himself between us. Becca's strength surprised me. She felt wiry, almost feral. Her fingernails dug into my shoulders. I managed to twist free, pushing her off and scrambling to my feet, my heart pounding in my throat. Milo snarled, baring his teeth, ready to attack if she advanced again. She rose from the ground with an uncanny grace, head cocked sideways. "Claire," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern, "you never told me how your parents died." My mind spun. "What does that have to do with anything?" I shouted. Panic tensed my entire body. Her face twitched, the corners of her mouth struggling to form an expression that wasn't fully human. "You never told me how they died," she repeated, voice trembling with quiet rage. And that was a betrayal. That was nonsense. She knew exactly how they died. Car accident. Years and years ago. But I realized it might not matter. The thing standing before me might not be Becca at all. "Don't come any closer," I warned, fumbling for my hunting knife in my pack. "I'll hurt you if I have to." She let out a quiet laugh, then turned and walked away, her posture stiff. She vanished behind the trees in seconds. I stood there, adrenaline coursing through me, half expecting her to come charging back at any moment. Milo whined. I patted his head, eyes scanning the forest. No sign of her. With shaky hands, I finished packing as fast as possible. Fear hammered at my skull. It felt like the entire forest was pressing in, waiting for me to slip up. I hurried Milo onto the nearest trail I could find, ignoring the sense of being herded. We hiked for an unknown length of time. My watch said 1:10 p.m., then jumped to 5:42 p.m. in the next blink. The sun's position was equally erratic, sometimes high overhead, sometimes replaced by a sullen dusk. At one point, I checked my phone for the map. The phone was at 2% battery, even though I'd barely used it. The screen glitched, the digital map fracturing into polygons, then went black. I cursed under my breath. We ended up on a rocky ridge with a partial view of the gorge. The stone archways and towering cliffs looked almost familiar yet wrong, as if the angles had shifted. The entire place seemed out of joint, like a painting that had started to melt. Milo was panting hard. I gave him water from my canteen and realized we were short on supplies if we stayed lost, especially with no easy source of help. I inhaled a shaky breath and decided to aim for Chimney Top Rock itself, a known overlook. If we could reach the official trail there, we might find other hikers, or at least an established route back to the park road. So we pressed on. The forest thickened, forming a twisted canopy overhead. Occasionally, I'd hear that sobbing again, echoing through the hollows. Once, I glimpsed something pale moving between the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. Another time I saw Becca's face through the leaves, smiling. Or maybe it was just my imagination feeding my paranoia. Night fell, if it truly was night, and I found a tiny opening beneath a leaning boulder. It wasn't the best shelter, but we needed rest. My feet ached, my nerves were shot, and Milo was whining from exhaustion. Inside the small enclosure, I tried to light a fire again. The lighter wouldn't spark. It had worked earlier, but now it refused. Sighing, I ate some cold jerky, gave Milo a little more food, and stretched out on the rocky ground. He lay beside me, trembling slightly. If I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps outside, leaves crunching. But every time I peeked, there was nothing but darkness. Somehow, I dozed off. I had nightmares, vivid, looping nightmares, where I saw myself wandering the gorge, screaming in circles around a flat rock. I heard my own voice calling me. When I jerked awake, my mouth was dry, and my watch read 3:27 a.m. That's when I heard the moaning near the entrance. Low and desolate, like a mourning woman. Milo barked, snarling as he jumped up. I scrambled out from under the boulder, knife in hand, praying it was a lost hiker I could help or scare away. But what I found was a battered figure hunched against a tree. A woman with disheveled hair wearing a torn flannel. "Becca?" I whispered. She turned her head slowly, revealing half her face scratched and bloody. The violent wind made her hair whip across her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a rasp came out, as though her vocal cords were shredded. Frigid sweat broke out on my skin. Something about her posture was grotesquely twisted. She reached toward me with trembling hands. I took a half step back. "Becca, do you need help?" I stammered, my heart pounding so hard I nearly dropped my knife. Her lips parted in a silent wail, black saliva dripping from the corners. My stomach lurched. Then, in a burst of speed, she lunged for me, nails clawing at my jacket. Milo barreled into her side, teeth snapping. She screeched, a noise so high-pitched and terrible that my vision blurred. We tumbled to the ground in a tangled mass of limbs. She fought like a wild animal, scratching and biting. I could smell decay on her breath. Finally, I slashed my knife across her arm. She shrieked, jerking away. Black ichor oozed from the wound, not normal blood. My mind whirled with revulsion. She glared at me, eyes blazing with hatred, and hissed like a feral cat. Then she darted into the trees, leaving a smear of that dark fluid behind. I struggled to catch my breath, Milo barking hysterically. My coat was ripped, but I hadn't been seriously injured. Shuddering, I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart gallop. I needed to get out of this cursed place. My illusions about quietly hiking out in the morning were gone. I decided to press on, night or not. Anywhere was better than here. Gathering my pack, I whistled for Milo and headed north. At least, I hoped it was north. The darkness made the forest a labyrinth. My flashlight flickered on the verge of dying, but I kept it pointed ahead. Milo was panting, muzzle flecked with foam. We broke through a line of pines and came to a steep drop-off. Down below, I saw a small campsite, only it wasn't empty. A figure was hunched over a second figure on the ground, rummaging in what looked like a backpack. Or maybe rummaging in them. The smaller figure lay still, limbs bent at impossible angles. My stomach turned. I scrambled to press myself against a rock, hoping not to be seen. The predator wore tattered jeans, a hood up. Its movements were jerky, marionette-like. Suddenly, it lifted its head and sniffed the air. I ducked lower, heart pounding. Milo let out a tiny, involuntary whine. I slapped a hand over his muzzle, desperate to keep us hidden. The figure below whipped around, scanning the tree line. After an excruciating moment, it dragged the corpse, or unconscious person, into the shadows. My breath came in shallow gasps. I couldn't do anything for that victim now, whoever they were. We needed to survive. My one sliver of hope was to circle past that campsite, stay high along the ridge and find the official trail. The alternative was to wander blindly, risking another confrontation. So I crept along the rock face, making as little noise as possible. Twice, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but each time I spun around, flashlight barely illuminating twisted branches, no one was there. Eventually, we found a narrow path that looked half natural, half man-made. It led upward. My watch read 4:50 a.m. The sky was black, but a faint red glow stained the horizon, or maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks. I realized something with horror. It might never become a normal day again. Time felt broken here, fractured. My watch was meaningless. As we climbed, the sobbing returned, closer this time, echoing in the hollows. My skin prickled at the sound. After a half hour, we reached a plateau with a partial view of the gorge in the gloom. I recognized the silhouette of Chimney Top Rock in the distance, maybe a quarter-mile away. Relief rushed through me. If I made it there, I might find the established footbridge or meet day hikers who'd come for the sunrise. Then, real rescue. Milo and I pushed on. The path turned rocky, twisting around massive boulders. We came to a small clearing with a circle of stones that looked like an abandoned fire pit. The space stank of sulfur. My eyes watered and Milo pawed at his muzzle. In the center of the circle lay a half-burned photograph. I picked it up without thinking. It was me, as a child, maybe 7 or 8, wearing a bright pink dress. My mother's funeral had been around that time. My breath caught in my throat. There was no rational reason this photo should be here. I dropped it, heart pounding, and nearly ran out of the clearing. That's when everything shifted. One moment I was stepping over a fallen log. The next, I was standing in my old bedroom from childhood, staring at the peeling wallpaper of cartoon flowers. My mother's voice called from the hallway, "Claire, come help me with the groceries." I froze, confusion and grief ripping me apart. She'd been gone for nearly 20 years. Then the walls buckled, fading into the shape of pines. I stood in the clearing again, tears streaming down my face. Milo whined, pressing against my leg. I realized that was the first time I had truly lost the distinction between nightmare and reality. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely breathe. At last, I forced myself to keep going, ignoring the illusions. The path eventually led us to the edge of the Chimney Top Rock. The overlook was deserted, no crowds, no day hikers. The cliffs fell away beneath us, the gorge dark and endless. Wind whipped my hair into my face, stinging my skin. A sign that read, "Caution, high cliffs," swayed on a battered chain. For a fleeting moment, I considered stepping off just to end this madness, but a bark from Milo snapped me out of it. He was fixated on a shape leaning against the sign. It was a woman. Long hair, wearing tattered jeans. My heart fluttered. Becca. She looked up, eyes glassy, then slowly smiled. She was blocking the path to the footbridge that led to the main trail. I braced myself, brandishing my knife. "You can't leave," she whispered, voice ragged, as though her vocal cords were shredded. "I need you to scream, Claire." My blood ran cold. "Get away from me!" She stepped forward, and I saw the black ichor still dripping from her arm. The wound I'd inflicted earlier had festered into a throbbing gash of swirling darkness. She didn't seem in pain. If anything, she looked triumphant. Beneath her breath, she murmured, "She's so hungry." A horrifying shriek tore through the sky, making my ears ring. Something, some presence, descended upon the overlook, swirling the wind into a vortex of leaves. The sobbing transformed into a wail that felt like it was peeling layers from my soul. Milo snarled, but his bravado cracked. He whined, tail tucked, as if the noise physically hurt him. In the swirling leaves, I caught a glimpse of a gaunt figure with rotted lips and wide, milky eyes. A banshee, or the local legend of the Hollow Woman. Her mouth hung open in an impossible gape, and her voice was that agonized cry. She hovered behind Becca. like a puppeteer controlling a marionette. I felt a wave of terror so pure I nearly collapsed. Becca cocked her head to one side, voice lowering. "You kept secrets from me. Now you need to pay." I realized this thing was feeding on the betrayal I had felt. Or maybe the betrayal I'd inflicted on her, or that she'd inflicted on me. The banshee thrived on heartbreak, anguish. The entire gorge felt infested by her presence. The illusions, the manipulations of time, they were all part of her domain. My mind rebelled, fear twisting my gut, but anger flashed in me as well. I refused to let this monstrous spirit devour me. I tightened my grip on my knife and darted forward, feinting to the left. Becca hissed, swiping at me with unnatural speed. She caught my shoulder and I felt nails rake flesh. A searing pain blossomed. Milo lunged at her flank, teeth snapping. He managed to latch onto her leg. She shrieked and flailed, black fluid spurting from the wound. For a second, she crumpled, and I seized the opportunity to charge directly at the swirling shape behind her. The banshee itself. The figure receded, floating back, her wail shifting to a note of shock. Her features, though rotted, twisted with an almost human expression of fear as I raised my knife. I slashed at the air where she hovered. The blade snagged something intangible but real, and there was a horrendous ripping sound. The banshee's scream magnified 100-fold, ripping into my skull, my vision blurred with tears, but I kept hacking, stabbing at the silhouette. Each strike sent a wave of agony through my arms, as if my nerves were on fire. Then, in a thunderous pulse, she vanished, only to reappear 20 feet away, wailing with fury. She soared upward, dissolving into the swirling night, or dawn, or whatever time it was. I'd hurt her, or at least driven her back, but I felt the aftermath in my bones, a draining sense of pure despair. Milo whimpered, letting go of Becca's leg to stagger backward. Becca collapsed, pale and panting, the black ooze sputtering from multiple wounds. Her lips trembled, and her eyes lost that uncanny shine for a moment. "Claire, help me," she whispered in her own voice. "It hurts." I knelt beside her, tears leaking down my cheeks. "Becca, are you—" My heart hammered, torn between wanting to help my old friend and the knowledge she might still be possessed. She coughed, spewing black mucus. "It wasn't me. She made me do it. I never wanted. Her eyes rolled back, and a final ragged breath escaped her. The black ooze trickled from her mouth, and her body went limp. A crack of thunder rent the sky, though there were no clouds. The banshee's wail echoed, distant but building in intensity. She was still out there, somewhere above the gorge. Milo and I flinched as the ground seemed to pulse, like the entire overlook might crumble beneath our feet. I grabbed Becca's lifeless shoulders, tears burning my eyes. She looked almost peaceful in death, though the horrors that had twisted her body remained obvious. The realization that I might have truly lost my best friend twice, once in betrayal, now forever, crushed me. But there was no time to grieve. A spectral moan descended from the sky. The banshee soared past, a swirl of decayed limbs and tattered clothing. She was searching for me, screeching my name in a voice that shouldn't be possible. I picked up my pack, almost delirious, and gestured for Milo to follow. The path to the footbridge was clear now. Becca was no longer blocking it. We bolted, crossing the narrow bridge. Every step felt precarious, the drop hundreds of feet below. The banshee's shrieks hammered my ears. I sensed her swooping overhead but didn't dare look up. We made it across, stumbling onto a more established trail, and saw a wooden sign hammered into the ground. It pointed left to Chimney Top Parking Lot, 1.0 miles. Relief soared in my chest. We broke into a shaky run, ignoring exhaustion and pain. That's when the final wail came, an ear-splitting note of pure hatred. The banshee dove, slamming into the path behind us with such force that the ground shuddered. I spun, brandishing the knife, but it felt useless against this swirling nightmare. She pinned me with her milky gaze. Her mouth, hanging open from torn cheeks, seemed to fill with roiling darkness. An unholy voice rattled the trees. You betrayed her. Each word dripped with malice. I swallowed the lump in my throat, remembering the many ways I'd failed Becca as a friend. "I'm sorry," I croaked, tears stinging my eyes. But regret wasn't going to banish this spirit. She advanced, the air around her crackling with dark energy. Suddenly, Milo leaped between us, barking furiously. With one last surge of courage, I lunged, driving my knife into the banshee's torso. I expected the blade to pass harmlessly through, but it sank into something solid. She shrieked, flailing, spectral limbs turning half-substantial. Her mouth gaped wider until her jaw cracked, the shriek cutting the night, or day, in two. A blast of rancid wind hit me like a hammer, throwing me back. My head smacked a tree trunk. I tasted blood and felt the world spinning. When I blinked, the banshee was retreating into the swirling darkness overhead, her form distorting. She howled once more, and then she was gone, dissolving into a ragged silhouette that vanished into the treetops. I forced myself upright, head pounding. Milo crawled over, limping but alive. The path was empty, no sign of the spirit or of Becca. The forest fell eerily silent, as if every living thing held its breath. I coughed, tasting iron. Staggering, we made our way down the trail. My watch said 10:15 a.m., but the sky overhead was an odd pre-dawn gray. The trail eventually widened, revealing a small wooden observation deck. Past it, I saw cars and a paved parking lot. Relief crashed over me in waves. We practically sprinted the final stretch. The lot was empty except for one battered pickup. I collapsed near a sign that said Chimney Top Rock, sobbing from exhaustion and heartbreak. A park ranger found me the next morning, or so I was told. My sense of time remained scrambled. He claimed I was delirious, barely coherent, with my dog cowering beside me. He asked if I'd been attacked by an animal. I told him the bare bones version, that I was lost, saw something in the woods, was chased. I left out the banshee and the black ichor. I knew he'd never believe me. They took me to the local hospital in Powell County. I had a mild concussion, a deep scratch on my shoulder needing stitches, and severe dehydration. The doctors assumed I'd been out there longer than a week. When I asked how long I'd actually been missing, I got conflicting answers. Some said 3 days, others said 2. At one point, a nurse told me I'd checked in only hours after I'd supposedly arrived. The timeline made no sense. When the police came, I told them about my friend, who might still be missing in the gorge. They searched, but found no sign of Becca. No body, no footprints, no personal items. They asked if Becca was a real person or if I'd hallucinated her. I tried to confirm her name in their missing persons database, but there was no recent entry for a Becca Taylor. The last record with that name was from 5 years ago in a different state. The officer gave me a confused frown, as though suspecting I was mentally unstable. I guess I can't blame him. Once I was discharged, I stayed in a cheap motel near the gorge for a couple of days, half expecting some monstrous shriek at my window in the dead of night. I busied myself searching for any clue about local legends. Stories of a banshee, or a hollow woman, or missing hikers. I found vague references to ghosts of the gorge, rumored sightings of strange wailing figures near Chimney Top Rock. A handful of old forum posts mentioned time anomalies, watchers in the woods, or hearing their own names whispered. But nothing that directly matched my experience. I'm back in Louisville now, though I don't feel truly home. Milo, poor boy, still wakes up yelping from nightmares. We both do. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning, I hear that sorrowful sob drifting on the wind. Sometimes I see a pale face in the corner of my vision, with rotted lips parted in a silent plea. If I blink, it's gone. I never got closure about Becca. Did she really die in the woods that night? Or was the real her gone long before I arrived? Was that possessed creature something that only wore her shape? Or did my betrayal somehow offer the banshee a foothold to twist her into an unholy puppet? A part of me wants to go back, if only to bury her. But a bigger part of me knows I might not escape a second time. The gorge has become a labyrinth in my nightmares, alive and hungry. If that banshee is still out there, and I'm certain she is, she might be waiting for me to return with my regrets and secrets to feed her. I have flashes of memory I can't explain. My old bedroom, my mother's funeral, the photograph in the clearing. I worry that some piece of the forest, or the banshee herself, lives inside my mind now. Sometimes, late at night, I wake to find my bed covers unzipped from the inside, or my clothes rotting in the closet. I try to tell myself it's just paranoia, a lingering trauma. Yet, deep down, I know it's real. I might be safe for the moment. But safety feels temporary. Every time a crow caws or a gust of wind rattles my windows, my heart leaps. Every time I close my eyes, I see that ragged mouth open in a silent scream. On bad nights, I hear my own voice echoing from the tree line, calling my name over and over. I wish I had a moral to share or some shining closure to this story. All I have is the memory of the black ichor on my hands, the stench of decay in the night, and the look in Becca's eyes, half longing, half hatred, pleading for a release that I couldn't give her. Part of me believes she's still out there, a ragged puppet in the banshee's hands, or a battered spirit lost in that timeless maze of cliffs and hollows. And part of me, though I try to bury it deep, worries that the banshee didn't really let me go, that maybe she only gave me a taste of freedom so that my guilt could marinate a little longer. Because heartbreak is a feast that never truly ends. I'm not sharing this account to ask for your pity or your belief. Honestly, I'm writing it down just so I don't forget, so that at least there's a record somewhere if my mind ever shatters completely. If you find yourself in Red River Gorge, near Chimney Top Rock, and you hear a woman sobbing from the hollow, or see the shapes flitting between the pines, turn around. Go back, or better yet, never go at all. Because if you stay, you might learn the same harsh lesson I did. That some places are hungry, and some screams are not meant for human ears, and once they latch onto your pain, they do not let go. My name is Josh Kelly. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in August of 2023. I wish I could say it was the worst month of my life, but if I'm being honest, what I experienced in Red River Gorge nearly broke my mind for good. Sometimes I'm not entirely sure I made it out, but I've got these scars on my arms, and they sure look real enough. I'll let you decide whether any of this ever truly happened. I had been planning this 4-day solo hike for months. I'm a freelance graphic designer from Louisville, and my life had gone stale in the worst way. My girlfriend and I had broken up, my rent kept climbing, and my work felt meaningless. You know, a classic meltdown scenario. The only idea that made sense was to pack a bag, drive out to Daniel Boone National Forest, and try to remind myself there was more to the world than my own misery. So, on a blistering hot Friday morning in August, I woke up at 5 a.m., threw my gear in my old Subaru, and headed east toward Red River Gorge. It's a place that has always pulled at me. Towering cliffs, ancient rock shelters, rugged trails that haven't changed for hundreds of years. If you need a reality check, that's the place to go. Yet, that morning, I was too restless to notice the beauty. My mind was locked on the details. Did I pack enough food? Did I remember the canteen, the water filter, the matches? The final turnoff for the trailhead was a narrow, twisting road that cut through dense forest. Mist curled up from the asphalt, giving the trees a ghostly look. Eventually, I reached a dirt parking area with enough space for maybe 10 cars. Only 2 other vehicles were there. A black Jeep and a battered old truck that looked like it had seen far better days. I didn't pay them much attention because I was still telling myself this trip was going to be a restful retreat. I had no idea what was coming. I did a last-minute gear check and glanced at my phone. The battery read 100%, which was a relief. I stashed it in my vest pocket. My GPS device, just a cheap handheld I'd bought for this trip, flickered on, displaying a standard trail map. All normal, nothing to worry about, or so I thought. Within the first hour, I noticed something off. The phone died, just like that. No warning, no gradual decline, just a black screen. Sure, maybe the battery was old, but I'd replaced it not too long ago. Annoying, but I shrugged it off. GPS was more important out here anyway. I clipped the phone onto my belt so I wouldn't lose it and continued hiking. The sun was baking me from above, but a breeze occasionally stirred the leaves, which offered short bursts of relief. I'm used to physical exertion, but after an hour of upward slogging, my thighs burned and sweat rolled down my face. I planned to reach a remote campsite along an unmarked side trail by evening. It's a spot I'd heard about online, known for its isolation and gorgeous sunrise view. I was maybe 4 miles into the hike when my GPS started acting wonky. The map flickered, then flashed a bright green bar across the screen before returning to normal. I assumed it was a glitch, cheap device, possible software bug, big deal. But every 10 or 15 minutes, it would happen again. A glitch, a flicker, a bright color, then back to normal. I told myself I could still read a paper map if it came to that. Mid-afternoon, the humidity felt like a hot towel pressed against my lungs, and I was relieved to finally pass the scenic overlook that indicated I was close to my planned campsite. I saw no one else on the trail, just the whir of insects and the shuffle of squirrels dashing through brush. Occasionally, I thought I heard a voice, my own name, drifting through the trees, but I dismissed it as exhaustion playing tricks on me. When I got near the spot where I wanted to make camp, I found a small clearing under a rock overhang, the ground littered with pine needles and half-rotted leaves. Perfect. I set down my pack, unrolled my tent, and set about collecting kindling for a fire. I figured a night under the stars, plus a toasty blaze, would finally calm my nerves. The previous week had been so chaotic I couldn't wait to just sit and zone out to crackling flames. But the fire refused to cooperate. It took me 10 tries just to get sparks to catch on the tinder, and when the kindling finally burst into flame, the color was all wrong. Almost a pale blue flicker instead of the normal warm orange glow. I blinked hard, certain my eyes were messing with me. I added more wood, and gradually it shifted to a more standard campfire hue, but something about it still looked off. Like the shape of the flame was elongated, too controlled, too contained. I smelled no strong burning scent either. Still, it was a fire, so I tried not to overthink it. It was only when the sun began to sink below the horizon that a prickle of dread skittered across my mind. I realized I was thinking about that odd voice I thought I'd heard. The forest around me grew unnervingly quiet, as though all the birds and insects decided at once to shut up and watch me. I forced myself to focus on more practical tasks, lay out the sleeping bag, filter water from the nearby creek, nibble on some protein bars. By nightfall, I almost convinced myself everything was normal. That first night, though, set the tone for what was to come. I'd crawled into my sleeping bag, letting the distant hoot of an owl lull me towards sleep, when I heard it again. A whisper, my name, from the darkness. No footfalls, no rustling branches, just my name, carried by the wind. My entire body tensed. I sat up, shining my headlamp out into the trees. "Hello?" My voice trembled in a way that made me feel foolish. No answer. The darkness stared back. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just anxiety and exhaustion playing havoc on my senses, so I laid down again, letting the tension subside. The next thing I knew, the sun was streaming into my tent. My eyes snapped open, a dull headache pounding behind my temples. Groggily, I unzipped the tent flap and stumbled out. To my surprise, the ashes from the fire were cold, as if it had gone out hours ago. I wasn't that heavy a sleeper. Usually I'd wake if the temperature changed significantly, but maybe I was more tired than I realized. Then I noticed my sleeping bag was unzipped, fully open from the inside. I always zip it up tight, especially to ward off nighttime chills. I frowned, checking to see if there were any footprints around my campsite. Nothing unusual anyway. I shrugged it off, telling myself I must have done it in my sleep. As I turned to rummage for my pack, I realized it wasn't there. Pure panic jetted into my stomach. My entire pack was gone. Food, water filter, extra clothing, everything. No, I muttered, scanning the area. Did an animal drag it off? I scoured the surroundings, rummaging through the undergrowth for a good hour, cursing in frustration as each minute ticked by. Then, in what felt like a bizarre dream, I spotted it. My pack was propped against a tree about 30 yards from my tent, as though someone had neatly placed it there. Some of the pockets were partially unzipped and my food looked damp. One bag of trail mix was moldy. Overnight? That was impossible. Another bag of dried fruit looked rotten, coated with a fuzzy gray mold. I racked my brain. How could it have degraded in a single night? Maybe the humidity, I told myself, or a leak in a water bottle. But deep down, I knew that was nonsense. My gear shouldn't rot in less than 12 hours. I tried to keep calm. If I let myself think too hard about it, I was going to lose it. I salvaged what I could, discarding most of the spoiled snacks, and drank half a bottle of water, hoping I could filter more soon. My plan was to continue on the trail to a second campsite about 6 miles away. Yet an uneasy feeling nagged me. Something was off. But what choice did I have? I couldn't turn back after only one day. I'd come out here for solitude and clarity, and it was too early to just admit defeat. I set off around 9 in the morning, weaving deeper into the gorge. The GPS occasionally flickered, but it still seemed to show a rough direction, so I went with it. About 2 hours in, I felt a tug at my memory, like I recognized these giant boulders and the shape of the path under my feet. But not from earlier today, from months ago, maybe a day hike I'd done. Red River Gorge had many trails, and some can look similar. But this was too exact, a cluster of mossy stones in the same arrangement I recalled from an old trip. I had this sudden, surreal sense of déjà vu. Shaking it off, I continued, determined to push that paranoia aside. Around noon, I turned a corner on the trail and spotted a man standing there, staring at a map. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing cargo shorts and a sweat-soaked t-shirt. It took me a moment to recognize him. "Mark?" I called. His head snapped up, eyes widening in surprise. Mark Davis, my old college buddy. We'd lost touch a few years after graduation. I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd become a software consultant. I had no idea he was the outdoors type. He sure hadn't been back in school. He used to always joke that camping is just homeless practice. Josh? Holy crap. He grinned in a way that felt forced, though maybe it was a genuine shock at seeing me. He stuffed his map in his pocket, striding closer with an outstretched hand. He had that same friendly confidence I remembered from college, always the center of the crowd. Except here, in the middle of nowhere, it felt out of place, like a stage actor in the wrong production. "What are you doing all the way out here?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. He chuckled. "Needed a break, man. City life was dragging me under, so I decided to get lost in the woods for a bit. Who knew I'd run into you?" We spent the next 10 minutes exchanging pleasantries, how we'd each ended up in the gorge, what we'd been doing with our lives. He talked about a messy divorce that drove him to seek isolation. I told him about my breakup and meltdown. We laughed awkwardly at the coincidence, but for me, it was a wary laugh. Something about him felt off. He seemed too relaxed. No sign of sweat beyond that single dark blot on his t-shirt, but I'd been hiking all day and was drenched. Also, the small details in his story kept shifting. First, he said he arrived last night, then he corrected himself to say it was 2 nights ago. He mentioned a friend, then claimed he was alone. I chalked it up to stress, or maybe just playing fast and loose with the truth. In college, he used to lie about small things just to smooth over conversations, but that had always been a harmless quirk. "Where are you headed?" I finally asked. He shrugged. "Nowhere special. I hear there's a good campsite about 2 miles down that way." He pointed behind me, in the direction I'd just come from. "That's weird. I was heading up trail to a site I read about. But you know what? Maybe we could camp together tonight, catch up a bit?" He smiled, a curious glint in his eyes. "Sure, that sounds good. I've got enough supplies to share if you're short." I didn't mention my rotted food, didn't want to look paranoid, and maybe having Mark around would ease my nerves about the weird incidents. Maybe a friend's presence would dissolve the creeping dread I couldn't shake. "All right," I said, "let's head that way." We hiked together for the rest of the afternoon. Strangely, my GPS seemed to behave better, only flickering once. Mark said he'd lost his phone a couple days ago, so we relied on my battered device and the physical map. As we walked, we made small talk, but I noticed Mark kept studying me, as if he were memorizing every word I said. Occasionally, he'd echo my last few words under his breath. An old habit, or maybe just a weird quirk. Still, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. We were both under stress. Eventually, we found a decent clearing nestled between tall pines, not far from a trickling creek. I suggested we set up camp there. We gathered firewood, pitched our tents, and he helped me string a tarp for extra shelter. On the surface, it almost felt like old times. 2 friends joking around, complaining about the humidity. But my gut kept twisting every time I glanced at him. Something about his posture was too rigid. As twilight fell, we tried to light a campfire. The matches fizzled, the tinder refused to catch. Eventually, Mark took over. He scraped his own flint and steel, and a spark lit the tinder almost too quickly. Once again, the flames had that pale blue tint. For a moment, it illuminated Mark's face in an unsettling glow. He was grinning, though not necessarily at me. More like to himself, enjoying a private joke. I tried to brush it off as the weird lighting. We roasted some of Mark's freeze-dried meals. He had more than enough, which was a relief, given my own food had gone bad. Over dinner, we reminisced about college. But he messed up details, saying we took a philosophy class together when it was actually an economics class, mixing up the name of my ex. I corrected him, but each time he'd wave it off with a right or "I'm just tired." Maybe it was an honest mistake. Yet, it gnawed at me, because Mark's memory used to be razor sharp. Could the divorce have rattled him so badly? Night fell, and the forest around us became so silent you could hear the crackle of the smallest ember. I was finishing my meal when my ears caught a series of faint snaps in the distance. Branches breaking. My heart hammered. "Hey, Mark, did you hear that?" He cocked his head, listening. "Probably just deer," he said with a half smile. "Nothing to worry about." But 5 minutes later, the same sounds repeated. Closer. And then I heard what sounded like my own voice drifting through the trees, so faint it could have been imagination. I shuddered. Mark laughed softly. "You look spooked." I forced a grin. "Guess I'm just not used to these woods at night." That was when we saw a moving light through the trees. A flashlight? A headlamp? It flickered once, then went dark. Then came the steady crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot, heading straight toward our camp. I stood up, adrenaline surging. Mark just stared, unblinking. Then she stepped into the ring of firelight. A young woman with curly dark hair pulled into a bun, wearing outdoorsy gear and sturdy boots. She seemed surprised to find us there. "Oh, sorry," she said, raising her hand slightly as if to show she wasn't a threat. "I saw the fire. I'm just passing through." Her name was Nina Alvarez, a wildlife photographer traveling solo. She had a camera slung around her neck and a battered backpack that had definitely seen miles. She asked if she could camp near us for safety. She was used to going alone, but with night falling, she didn't want to risk wandering off trail. We invited her to join us by the fire, and she gratefully sat down. Immediately, Nina eyed Mark with guarded suspicion. I thought maybe she was just wary of two male strangers, but there was something else in the way her gaze lingered on him, like she sensed something was amiss. We made small talk. She told us she was out here trying to capture photos of rare birds, but had trouble with her camera's clock resetting. She showed us a few shots she'd taken earlier in the week. Her camera's data insisted these pictures had been taken on a future date, like 2 days from now. We all laughed nervously, chalking it up to some bizarre glitch. But a quiet tension settled in. Eventually, Nina asked Mark, "So, how long have you been out here?" He hesitated. "Couple days," he said. "Hard to keep track of time." She furrowed her brow. "You have a watch, though." He glanced at his wrist, almost as though surprised to find a watch there. "Oh, yeah, broke on day 1. Can't trust it anymore." Her eyes darted to me as if asking, "Is this guy for real?" We all tried to settle in for the night. Nina set up her tent about 20 feet from ours, and I retreated to mine. Mark insisted he'd keep watch for a while, in case any wildlife happened by. I crawled into my sleeping bag feeling uneasy but too exhausted to stay awake. My last waking thought was the silhouette of Mark by the fire. His shape outlined in that strange bluish glow, the flames dancing weird shadows across his face. Sleep eventually dragged me under like a heavy blanket. When I woke the next morning, dawn was barely peeking through the trees. I stretched and unzipped my tent, immediately noticing that something was off. The fire pit was cold, the remains of the wood scattered like they'd been kicked. No sign of Mark. Nina's tent was still there, half collapsed, but she was nowhere in sight either. I called out, "Hello, Mark? Nina?" My voice sounded thin in the silence. A few birds sang overhead, but the woods felt heavy, like they were pressing in. I walked over to Nina's tent, empty. She'd left some gear behind, including her camera lens. Why would she leave that? It made no sense. My stomach tightened with dread. I spotted footprints in the damp soil, heading off toward the creek. Maybe they'd gone to get water. So I followed them, carefully stepping between the pine needles. After about 50 yards, the trail bent around a large boulder, and I found Nina crouched by the water's edge, looking pale and furious, water trickling from her cupped hands. She jerked her head around when I approached. "Where's Mark?" I asked. She exhaled sharply. He was supposed to fetch something or check the perimeter. Didn't come back. I went looking for him, but didn't see him. We returned to camp together, searching the immediate area. We found no sign of Mark. Then we noticed that some of his gear was still by his tent, except for his backpack. Nina and I exchanged a worried look. "This doesn't feel right," she said. "I barely know him, but from what you told me last night, you guys have a history. Would he just wander off?" "No," I said slowly. "He's the kind of person who tries to keep up appearances. He wouldn't just ditch us without saying something, especially leaving half his stuff behind." Something in Nina's stance told me she had more to say. She led me a few yards away, ensuring we couldn't be overheard, though nobody else was around. She muttered, "Mark was acting strange last night after you went to sleep." I woke up to hear him walking around, talking to himself. I listened, and she swallowed, eyes dark with apprehension. "I'm not sure if it was him, or if it was your voice, but I swear I heard two different voices out there. I thought maybe you were up too, but when I checked your tent, you were sound asleep." A chill crawled down my spine. I told her about my rotted food, the missing pack, the glimpses of something that felt like me in the woods. Nina bit her lip, mind clearly racing. "I saw something through my camera lens yesterday in the late afternoon. I was focusing on a woodpecker, but there was movement behind a tree. 2 men. At first, I thought it was you and Mark. But the shape, one of them looked exactly like you, but not quite. The figure's face was hidden, but the clothes, the build, the height. It was you, Josh. I just assumed I was seeing a trick of the light, or maybe it was Mark. But now..." Nina and I looked around, half expecting someone to leap from the bushes. But everything was eerily still, the forest bright and warm in the morning sun. The incongruity made my scalp prickle. We decided to search more thoroughly for Mark. If he was in trouble, we needed to help. If he'd simply gotten lost, maybe we'd find a clue. Nina took out her camera to document the area, perhaps to keep track of any footprints. As she snapped a few shots of the campsite, she blanched. "Josh, the timestamp is reading August 29th. She showed me the screen. That was 3 days from now. We followed faint footprints, boots about Mark's size, leading away from camp. They disappeared in rocky terrain. 2 hours of searching turned up nothing, so we returned to camp, exhausted and anxious. We rehydrated. Then I insisted we keep an eye out for Mark in case he came back. We sat in uneasy silence, occasionally calling out his name. It was nearly noon when I heard Nina gasp. I looked up from rummaging in my pack to see Mark stumbling toward us, emerging from behind the thick trunk of a cypress. Relief collided with alarm the moment I saw his face. He looked unhurt physically, but his expression was wrong. His eyes were wide and unblinking, his lips parted in a bizarre grin that never changed shape. "Mark, where the hell did you go?" I demanded, stepping forward. He just kept smiling. The tension was immediate. Nina stayed back, hand hovering near her belt knife. Mark blinked finally, once, twice. Then he said, "I'm sorry, I found something." His tone was flat, lifeless, like a robot imitating human speech. I forced a laugh, trying to diffuse the tension. "All right, well, we were worried. You can't just vanish like that." He stared at me, not quite focusing on my eyes. Then, in a too calm voice, he asked, "Worried? That's nice." His eyes shifted to Nina. "Did you know that Nina used to keep a journal about her father's drinking problem?" Nina froze. "How do you—" She shook her head, shock turning into anger. "I never told you that." Mark's lips stretched into that same grin. "I know everything." Then he shifted his gaze to me. "I know what you told your ex, that you sometimes wish you were someone else." My throat went dry. I had confided that to my ex, but never to Mark. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Okay, Mark," I said, forcing calm. "Let's just sit down. Something's obviously wrong." He nodded, but his motions were stiff, mechanical. "Yes, I'm tired," he said. He walked to the fire pit and sat on a rock. Nina shot me a look that said this is not the same person we talked to last night. For the next half hour, we tried coaxing a reasonable explanation from him. Where had he gone? Why did he talk about personal stuff he shouldn't know? He just repeated random phrases, snippets of things I'd said on the trail, or private confessions Nina had alluded to last night. It was like he was wearing Mark's face but reciting lines from a script. Finally, he announced he needed to gather wood. "Firewood," he repeated. "We need more wood." Then he stood and marched stiffly away, not waiting for any reply. We let him go, fear battling reason. We needed to talk without him hearing. Nina whispered, "I don't think that's Mark. Or if it is, something's happened to him." I nodded, feeling the weight of dread behind my ribs. "What do we do?" "Get out of here," Nina said bluntly. "I don't know what's going on, but none of it is normal. We can head back to the trailhead." A wave of relief coursed through me. Yes, leaving made sense. Nothing about this trip was redeeming anymore. I wanted out. We scrambled to collect what we could, but before we could finish packing, Mark returned, arms loaded with kindling. He dropped it near the pit, stared at us with that grin. "Going somewhere?" he asked softly. Nina kept her eyes on him. "Yes, we're heading back. You should come with us." For a moment, Mark looked almost sad. His eyes flicked between us, and for a second I thought I glimpsed the old Mark, some shadow of the college friend I knew. Then he blinked, and that false grin returned. "I think we should stay," he said. "It's safer in the forest." Then, in a voice that echoed my own tone, he added, "The forest is better than the city." My blood ran cold. That was something I'd told myself in the car on the way here, alone, not out loud to anyone. I suddenly felt claustrophobic, like the trees were closing in, like the sky was pressing down. Nina touched my shoulder gently, a silent demand to keep calm. "Mark," she said, "we're going now. If you don't want to come, that's your choice." She turned her back on him and went to heft her pack. I did the same, though my nerves were fried. I was worried Mark might do something drastic. As if reading my mind, Mark reached out and clutched Nina's arm. His hand was trembling. His grin turned into a snarl. "Don't go," he said, voice low and menacing. "We can share. We can all share, like me and him." Nina yanked her arm free, stepping back. "Get away from me," she spat, brandishing her knife. She's a lot braver than I was in that moment. I had no clue how to handle an old friend possessed by... What? Some malicious presence? Mark's grin twitched, anger rippling across his features like static. Then, abruptly, he turned and walked away again, disappearing behind the trees. Nina and I shared a look that said, "Let's get the hell out of here," and we did just that. We hustled along the trail, not stopping to see if Mark followed. But the forest felt all wrong. The path was the same, but the twists and turns seemed out of order, or repeated. My GPS started freaking out again, flashing bright lines of color. The compass app on Nina's camera refused to stabilize. Occasionally, I'd see glimpses of movement, maybe Mark, maybe something else, pacing us among the trees. Each time I tried to get a clear look, it vanished. At some point, we realized we weren't making the progress we expected. We should have been halfway to the parking area, but the landmarks were unfamiliar. The sun hung low, signaling late afternoon, yet the space around us had a timeless, frozen quality. My watch read 3 p.m., then 3:01 p.m., and froze for what felt like an hour. Nina's camera timestamp jumped ahead to August 31st, and then back to August 28th. Our sense of time was unraveling. By early evening, we were desperate. We found a small open spot near a stream. Nina insisted we stop to refill water and gather ourselves. My heart pounded from panic and exertion. We took turns scanning the woods, certain Mark would appear at any moment. But he didn't. We built a small fire to boil water. Once again, the flames burned bluish, then flickered normal. I tried to stay calm, forcing myself to believe it was some weird chemical in the wood. Nina was on edge, glancing over her shoulder constantly. Every shadow seemed a potential threat. Night fell, and with it came an oppressive silence. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just the crackle of the fire. Exhaustion pulled at my eyelids, but fear kept me upright. Nina and I took turns dozing for a few minutes at a time. At some point during the night, I swear I heard my own voice from the darkness, mocking me. Then I jolted awake to realize Nina was shaking me, eyes wide. "Josh, wake up! Do you hear that?" A faint murmuring, a shuffle of leaves. We stood, creeping toward the sound. Less than 50 yards away, a figure stood in the moonlight. It was Mark, or at least it had his general shape, but his posture was contorted, head tilted at an odd angle, arms limp. I stifled a scream when I saw that his face wasn't quite right. His mouth gaped open, the jaw unhinged as though it were broken. Yet he was smiling. He mumbled something incoherent, or many things at once, words that sounded half like mine, half like Nina's, half unknown. We retreated, hearts hammering, as the figure faded into the dark again. Shortly after, Nina decided we couldn't just sit there. She took her camera and told me she was going to try to get a photograph. "If it's Mark, we have to help him," she hissed, "or at least document what the hell is happening." Without waiting for my reply, she darted into the darkness. My stomach churned at the thought of being left alone, so I followed. We crept through the undergrowth, guided by moonlight and adrenaline, searching for any sign of Mark. We found him near a tall oak. He was staring up at the branches. Nina raised her camera, snapping a few pictures. The flash lit up the scene, revealing the vacant look in Mark's eyes, the unhinged grin. Then Mark jerked his head toward us. He let out a ragged breath, stepping closer, arms outstretched as if to embrace us. Nina backed away, but Mark moved with unsettling speed, grabbing her wrist. Before I could intervene, he swung his free hand and bashed her over the head with something, a rock, maybe. She collapsed, dropping the camera. "No!" I yelled. My mind reeled, heart in my throat. Mark turned to me, that grin carved into his face as though one side of his jaw hung lower than the other. He whispered, "It's not that bad once it's inside you, Josh." Then he lunged. We struggled, grappling in the half-dark. His strength was uncanny, but I managed to wrestle him onto the ground, pinning him with my knee on his chest. In a burst of desperate courage, I grabbed the nearest broken branch and drove it into his cheek. He screamed. A hideous, high-pitched wail that definitely wasn't Mark's voice. It echoed around the trees, setting my teeth on edge. He writhed beneath me, flailing like a cornered animal. I pressed down with the branch, rage and horror fueling me. The grin vanished, replaced by an agonized contortion that barely looked human. He spat thick, dark fluid that smelled of mold and copper. Gagging, I shoved him away, stumbling to my feet. Nina lay on the ground, groaning. I rushed to her, checking for a pulse. She was alive, though blood oozed from her scalp. Mark was still thrashing, that branch protruding from his face. I could see the damage. Not normal blood. It was dark and lumpy, half mud, half flesh. The edges of his wound twitched like insects crawling just beneath the skin. He coughed out a wet laugh, eyes rolling wildly. "You!" he rasped, and his voice sounded like mine, my own voice, strangled, mocking. "You wanted to be someone else." I scrambled to help Nina stand. She clung to me, dazed. "We have to go," I said. "We can't fight that thing again." We staggered back toward our campfire, supporting each other. Mark's shrieks followed us, bouncing through the trees. Then it faded into a series of whimpers. Finally, silence. We sank by the embers of the fire, chest heaving, minds churning. Nina's temple bled, but she insisted she could keep going. She was unbelievably tough. We heard no more of Mark that night. Maybe we left him to bleed out, or maybe something else happened. I didn't want to know. We snatched a few ragged hours of sleep, haunted by nightmares of doppelgangers with rotting faces. When dawn arrived, I felt numb, like I'd left my soul behind somewhere in the darkness. Nina was pale, but her wound had clotted. She insisted we try to find a way out again. "Better to die trying than wait for that thing to come back," she said. The day was a blur of trudging through the woods, climbing over rocks, scanning for any sign of a real trail. My GPS was useless now. The screen just displayed static lines. Nina's camera started glitching whenever she turned it on. The sun climbed, then sank. We must have hiked for hours, but we kept passing the same boulder formation. "We're going in circles," Nina said, voice trembling with frustration. She hurled a stick at a tree. "It's like the forest is rearranging itself." My mind flashed back to that rotted food, the missing pack, the unzipped sleeping bag, Mark's bizarre knowledge. "Maybe it's not the forest," I whispered. "Something's messing with us." By mid-afternoon, we were nearly out of water, physically and mentally drained. We had just scaled a rocky ledge when we glimpsed movement on the path ahead. Someone stooped over a small cairn of stones. Terrified it might be Mark or that entity, we hid behind some foliage, peeking out. A wave of relief and dread hit me simultaneously. It was Mark again, or the shape of him kneeling by a stack of stones. Except the left side of his face was a horror show of torn flesh and blackish fluid. His jaw hung crookedly, yet he moved with a calm deliberation, stacking stones in neat rows, as though possessed by a quiet focus. I clamped a hand over Nina's mouth to stop her from gasping. Then we watched in paralyzed silence as Mark wiped his bloody hands on his shirt. He seemed to sense our presence. His body went rigid, then he slowly turned his head, scanning the trees. Nina and I ducked lower, my breath caught, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. A moment passed, then two. Silence. When I dared to look again, Mark was gone, leaving only the cairn behind. We risked creeping out into the open. The stones were slick with that same dark sludge. Nina's eyes welled with tears. My entire body trembled. This was beyond anything rational. We didn't linger. We ran, or tried to. Branches clawed at our clothes, and at times the trees seemed to shift as we passed, contorting the trail. My watch read 5 p.m. for what felt like hours. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in purple and orange. We had to find a way out. Some road, a trail marker, anything. Eventually, we spilled out onto a wide path that looked more traveled. My heart leapt. Maybe this was near the parking area? Nina and I followed it, nearly delirious. We stumbled over rocks and tree roots, spurred on by fear alone. At one point, I glimpsed a shape in the woods that looked like me. Exactly like me. Wearing the same clothes, same posture. It vanished behind a tree. I had to fight the urge to tear off in the opposite direction. Nina squeezed my arm, keeping me from losing it completely. We pressed on until darkness was nearly total. That was when we saw a faint orange glow ahead. Lights? A campsite? I hoped for other hikers, anyone normal. We crept closer, hearts hammering, and found another campsite. At first, I thought it was deserted, but then I saw the silhouette of someone crouching by the fire pit. Relief surged through me until I recognized the details of the site. It was my campsite. The same rock overhang, the same half-burnt log, the same arrangement of my belongings. I saw my old sleeping bag, half buried under pine needles. How was that possible? We'd traveled miles. I felt my mind teetering on the brink, trying to reconcile the impossible. Nina clutched my hand. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Then, in the dim glow of the embers, the crouching figure turned its head. It was me, or something wearing my face. Yeah, its expression was twisted in heartbreak, tears streaking down its cheeks. Slowly, it stood, mirroring my stance, except everything was reversed, like a reflection in a mirror. I couldn't breathe. Behind me, Nina whispered, "Josh, we have to go," but I was transfixed. The other parted its lips, a rasping voice emerging. "You don't even like yourself," it said, echoing the words from my own memory, words I'd spoken to my ex once in a moment of self-loathing. Why shouldn't I wear you better? I stumbled backward, heart in my throat. The other advanced. My mind screamed that this was some manifestation of my deepest insecurities, but the physicality was undeniable. It was real. Nina raised her knife, but her hand shook. The other didn't even spare her a glance. Its eyes were locked on me, as though she didn't exist. My flight response kicked in. I threw myself to the side, grabbing the nearest piece of jagged wood from the old campfire stash. The other lunged. We collided in a tangle of limbs rolling across the ground. It was strong, unbelievably so, and fast. Its features were still mostly mine, but the skin felt cold, almost rubbery. Its eyes were vacant, yet somehow full of malevolence. I heard Nina shouting, but everything was a blur. I managed to get the jagged wood against the other's chest and shoved with all the strength I had. It let out a guttural hiss, blackish sludge pouring from the wound. The stench was overwhelming. Decay, mold, and something sulfuric. Its face twitched, flickering through different expressions, even faces. For a split second, it looked like Mark's twisted grin, then Nina's terrified eyes. Then it settled back into my own face, mocking me. I yelled, forcing the stake deeper. With a final shriek, the other writhed, scraping at my arms with nails like hooks. Then it slumped to the side, an inhuman rattle leaving its throat. I backed away, hyperventilating, the front of my shirt soaked in that vile fluid. Nina dragged me to my feet, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Is it dead?" she asked, voice shaking. I stared at the motionless thing. Even in the dim light, I could see the edges of its face changing, warping into something that was neither me nor fully human. "I don't know," I muttered, but it wasn't moving. We left that clearing, stumbling away, ignoring the pains in our bodies, ignoring the protest of battered muscles. We had to keep moving, keep searching for an exit. Time lost all meaning in that labyrinth of trees. The moon was high, then low, then gone. The forest felt endless, an infinite loop. At one point, Nina collapsed, tears of frustration. I picked her up, half carrying her. We were running on desperation alone. By some miracle, the trees thinned and we spilled out onto a narrow service road just after sunrise. It was cracked and overgrown, but definitely a road. Relief hit me like a hammer. We followed it, limping along in silence, until after about an hour we reached a sharp bend. There, we saw a beat-up old Jeep parked at the edge. A man in ranger gear was there, checking something under the hood. At the sight of him, I almost cried. He looked up at us warily, saw our condition, and froze. Sweet Jesus, he muttered. You two all right? We collapsed, babbling half-coherent explanations about being lost, about Mark. The ranger, he introduced himself as Alan Reese, helped us into his jeep, gave us water, asked a million questions. Nina clung to me, trembling. I just kept repeating, "We have to get out." He drove us down the winding roads, eventually reaching a small ranger station. By the time we got there, the world felt dreamlike. Paramedics were called. Nina was bleeding from her head wound. I had lacerations all over my arms, caked in dried blackish sludge. But at that point, the sludge looked more like normal blood mixed with dirt. I had no rational way to explain that to the ranger or the medics. We were taken to a hospital in Winchester where they gave us fluids and sedation. Nina's scalp wound required stitches. They ran blood tests on me, which all came back normal except for some signs of dehydration and possible infection. No trace of any bizarre substance in my system, or so they told me. The doctors asked a barrage of questions about potential wildlife attacks, hallucinogenic ingestion, or trauma. I couldn't give them an answer that made sense. I was kept overnight for observation. Nina was in a separate room, stable but quiet. We occasionally exchanged looks that said, "We know what we saw," even if no one believes us. The nurses tried to be gentle, but it was clear they thought we were either lying or disturbed. And maybe we were disturbed, for all I knew. The next day, I woke to find a nurse had placed a metal tray of food on my bedside table. My eyes felt gritty, my body sore. I reached over to pick up the fork. Then I caught my reflection in the tray. My face was pale and haggard, smudges under my eyes, but my reflection's lips twitched slightly before I moved, like it was smiling just a fraction of a second before the rest of my face. My heart turned to ice. I blinked, leaning closer. The reflection was just me, hollow-eyed, unkempt hair, hospital gown, but for a moment I could have sworn it was smiling when I wasn't. I dropped the tray with a clatter, nearly spilling everything. The nurse rushed in, confused. I stared at the reflection again, but now it looked perfectly normal. No sign of that flicker. Slowly, I lowered my head. Was that just my traumatized imagination? Or something more? That's the worst part. Even now, as I sit here writing all this, my arms still have faint scars where Mark or the others scratched me. My memory is a mosaic of nightmares, and whenever I see my reflection, I feel a subtle dread crawling over my skin. Because sometimes I catch a twitch or a smile that doesn't belong to me, and I wonder if the creature that wore my face truly died in that lonely clearing, or if it found a new place to hide. I might never know for sure. All I can do is keep living, though some days I have no clue how. Nina eventually recovered and moved out of state, wanting as much distance from Kentucky as possible. We text occasionally, but we never really talk about what happened. Mark was never found, and there was no missing persons report matching his description filed in any official capacity. It's like he never existed, like the forest ate him. And so here I am, left with no closure, no final explanation. Every time I close my eyes, I remember that face grinning at me. My own face, but not mine. I try to convince myself that I escaped it, that whatever horrors lurk in Red River Gorge can't reach me here in the city. But in the quiet moments, when dusk stretches shadows across the walls, a small voice in my head wonders, what if I brought it back with me? I suppose that's why I'm telling this story. Maybe if I name it, write it down, it'll stay on the page. Maybe it will lose power. Or maybe I'm just fooling myself. Either way, if you ever find yourself in those woods, and you catch a glimpse of what looks like your reflection out among the trees, run. Just run. because I'd rather be paranoid than meet something that's wearing my face better than I ever could. That's everything I remember, everything I can bear to say. Take it as a warning or a confession, because the horrifying truth is I'm not sure where I end and the creature begins.